Yo, as you see in the building, Source Gang, 7 Gang, over everything. You know how we doing. You know how we rocking, man. You know how we rocking. While our competitors, if you could even call them that, they're not really competing. We really in our own lane, are talking about other things that are not conducive to education. I'm going to be using this time to be doing the exact opposite. Like Jay-Z said, I've been on the total opposite. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to be dealing with archaeology tonight. That's what we're going to be dealing with. Then tomorrow we're going to get back into the Parfit's book, and we're going to finish chapter 4. I believe we're on chapter 4, and I'm going to be finishing up the PowerPoint slides for Edith Bruder's book, The Jews in in Africa. So just be patient on that. That will be finalized and finished. I'm going to spend some time getting those slides into PowerPoint format so we can produce that last and final part, and that book will be completed. It will be archived on the channel, and a playlist will be on Source Debate League and Genesis 49ers, so you guys can easily reference that, the entire book. So any question about that book, you can always refer to our page and our work and what we did in our breakdown of that actual and particular book. But with no further ado, we're going to introduce and open up the video tonight with LV Europa, masterful artist, hip-hop artist, very talented lyricist, dope lyricist, by the way. You know what I'm saying? Go to his channel, LV Europa TV, and subscribe. Tonight we will be touching on the archaeology of Israel, Judah, and Edom. Very poignant points and, pertinent to our studies and edification on the Israelite history, archaeology, anthropology, and so on and so forth. And I believe it's very needed in the community because there's a paucity of videos pertaining to this subject by quote-unquote Hebrew Israelites. So, you know what I'm saying? You come to my channel, you're going to get thoroughly educated and informed. I actually spend my free time reading, unlike some people. All right, so we open up with LV Europa. The song is called Like You. You can find this song on Europa Report TV on YouTube. Subscribe to his channel. Support this man. He's making good, positive, high vibe, high frequency music that a lot of our people are lacking. So let's get it, man. Let's get it. You know how we do it. Source Gang. You know how I'm rocking, man. You know how we rocking, man. Let's go.
If you haven't figured it out by now, I go by LV Europa, aka the people. Yeah, wanna be like you. This is to the pharaohs of the world. I hand off my people. Yeah, it's Rope. Are you where you will wanna be? Are you prepared for the wannabes? Too many people trying to be like you, but I can see right through what they want to be. They want to be you. Just tell me what you want to be. They want to be you. I want you to tell me where you want to be. You're the one that they want to see. So right now, you're the one that I want to see. I need you. I'm from the city where the youngest play. Grown up to turn run away. I know some niggas buy it on a day. You hold the shit that you want to say. I hit the beat like the drummer say. I run it up what the number say. I bring it back like the number 8. I get hungry like I never ate. This will work to the wise. If you want to escape, you got to sit there, wait. Are you prepared for the one Are you where you will wanna Too many people trying to be like you, but I can see right through what they wanna be. They wanna be you. Oh yeah. I want you to tell me where you wanna be. You're the one that I wanna see. So right now you're the one that I wanna be. I need you. I'm from the world where they get it right. You have a chance and you live a life. You wanna be alike. My stripes they come with stripes. There's a price to give me hype. Alright. I got my love in a little bit. I gave some just to give it lit. Just for my dogs, nigga, take a whiff. You play ball, nigga, wanna pitch. We all in if you wanna risk. I'm prepared for the winners, the ones that run us into the fall to the summer. Cause we got cause to get the numbers in the big body hummers, and we won't stop until they all wanna be like you. Now let me tell you what they wanna do. Nothing to prove but to get the clues. I'm up working when a nigga snooze. I had beef, but I call it truth. Middle finger turn in the deuce. I in the juice when a nigga shoot. I spread love, then I get the loot. Real rap, no need to recruit. Salute, cause they all wanna be like you. Are you where you wanna be? Are you prepared for the wannabes? Too many people trying to be like you, and I can see right through what they wanna be. They wanna be you. They wanna be you. It's Rover, but won't you tell me what you wanna be? You're the one that I wanna see. So right now, you're the one that I wanna be. I need you. I want you to tell me what you wanna be. I want you to tell me what you wanna see. I want you to tell me what you wanna dream. Don't you know about the wannabes? It's Rover. Won't you tell me what you wanna dream? Yeah. LV, you gotta watch for the wannabes. Yeah. You know where to find me at Facebook. Where we gonna wannabes? What they wanna be? You. Damn. Wanna be like you. Are you prepared for the wannabes? Are you where you wanna be? Yeah. They wanna be like you. Are you prepared for the wannabes? Report TV.
All right, let's get right into it. Yeah, man. All his hooks dope, man. This brother, like I said, very talented. I'm gonna continue to big my brother up. LV, man, keep doing your thing, man. Whenever you get your LP, EP ready, you do your promo run over here, and we got you. But with no further ado, why you actually viewing tonight? It's because we're going to be dealing with the archaeological evidence of Israel, Judah, and Edom. Now, when we deal with the Israelite kingdom, we do understand that the Israelite kingdom reflects a unified kingdom according to the biblical narrative in earlier times, and then it became a split entity later on in what we call the Iron 2A period. And because we know the Assyrian influences and everything came in and started to deport the Israelites from the northern kingdom. And there's evidence for that. Tudor Parfit talks about that. Eda Bruder talks about that they find Hebrew names in the Assyrian armies, showing an assimilation during that period, means there's empirical reality to the biblical narrative. A lot of people try to play the Bible down as if just fanciful stories, but actually a lot of what the Bible was saying, and we're going to cover some of those things tonight on tonight's broadcast, has been dug up by archaeologists and has been attested to by archaeology and anthropology and documentary evidence, written evidence, like the Kirk inscription going over the Assyrian invasion and showing that Israel was indeed a polity that existed in times past around the 9th or 8th century BCE. All right, so with no further ado, let's get the book up. You know what we do here. Y'all know the slogan, man. It's source up, man. Source game. We go straight to the source here. We're not with the rhetoric and the playing that you see on other channels like Sunnetter TV, Dagger Swad, Team Osiris. They play with rhetoric. It's a lot of rhetoric and outdated, antiquated argumentum that they have and they rely on because they're pseudo. But here we go straight to the source material. And if anybody, after reading this material, understanding this material, say that Israel didn't exist at all, because you got people, or you have cynics that do that, religious cynics that sit here and say Israel didn't exist at all, it's all fake, it's all made up. And it's like, how do you How do you reconcile the fact that we have tons of archaeological evidence, empirical data, things that we can observe, showing and proving that this was a polity, this was a statehood, this was a nation that existed in times past? There's no way around that. It's a question of historicity, but people have a bias, and their bias controls their view so much that they will even go to the extremity of saying and stating and making the erroneous claim that Israel never existed. You hear that a lot, especially in Afrocentric communities. Sinetta Garfield, his peoples. I'm not saying them in particular, but the people that follow that way of thinking or may have fell under that tutelage of people like that will come to that extreme belief, which is not supported with the archaeological record, not supported by anthropology at all, and it's not supported by DNA at all. So let's get into it. I'm going to share my screen. We go directly to the source. Hit that like button, man. Support the channel. Support the channel and support us, and we will continue to feed you. Remember this. The harvest be plenty, but the laborers be few. It's not that many of us doing this research and studying and putting in the time and effort to actually make this a reality. So appreciate those that do. You know what I'm saying? Appreciate Morey Yeshaya. He's live right now as well, and he's giving a class on the history of Israelites as it relates to America. Israel history as it relates to the world right now. He's actually live. So, show that brother some support, because he actually does a lot of digging, a lot of research, and brings it to the forefront, using the heuristic method. And you got to appreciate stuff like that. That's a dime and a dozen, especially when you got your Black Jesus ministers, your Jeremiah Judas, and you got these other fringe Israelites that don't bring forth they don't bring forth empirical studies. They're like purely religious or purely what's the word I'm looking for? It's purely cultic in nature. Instead of informative, they're purely dogmatic. So you have to appreciate the brothers and sisters that put in that time. Sister E channel, subscribe to her. Anonymous Hebrew, he's another one. Elder Yara, heavy hitters. You understand? Orthodox Moore's channel. You need to go to Orthodox Moore, subscribe to his channel, man. He got a few videos about Tudor Parfit, the pews, the writings on it, and the controversy behind that. Is it Hebrew? Some of it Hebrew, Arabic. And they have a lot of great insightful studies and videos that they're doing on that channel, Orthodox Moore's channel, and Debate Talk for You. So when you come across that information, give them your support. A lot of you Israelites run to Sinetta, y'all run to Garfield because you want to see the conflict and the drama, but not understanding you're feeding into that and not feeding it into the actual studying, the actual reading, the actual information aspect of this. Because if we're going to say that this nation is true and that we are these people, then we have to take it as serious as we can. And take it as far as we can. So you guys need to be supporting those that do that. You should be supporting Anonymous Hebrew, Orthodox Moore, Elder Yara, Morey Yeshaya, Daniela. You need to start supporting these people and going to their channel, running to their channels, Divine Prospect, and enjoying and actually supporting and learning from these channels instead of running to the conflict, running to the opposition all the time. Well, I'm going to watch Sinetta. I'm going to watch this, because it's sensationalism at the end of the day. And we can't let sensationalism overrun education and edification. You understand? We can't do that. And I'm not going to allow it here at the source. We're going to continue to give you guys solid content, information. You guys are going to be edified. So let me go share my screen. I just had to get that tidbit of information. Let a few more people come in. You know what I'm saying? Let the readers in. They see us knocking at the door. Let the readers in. The ops talking smack. They can't defeat us then. Let's go. So this is the Oxford Handbook of the Archaeology of the Levant from circa 8,000 to 332 BCE. BCE just means before the Common Era. And this particular section was written by Anne E. Keelybrew. Introduction. This is the introduction part. It says Israel as a person, people, region, and kingdom plays a prominent role in the biblical narrative. And I think we've blown up. Yeah, that's why. There we go. We're blown up. Let me make sure you guys can actually see this. Let me put that on full screen. Shout out to everybody that just came in. Hit that like button. Shabbat shalom to my brothers and sisters out there that are trying to learn. Let's get it. All right, so chapter 48, Israel during the Iron Age 2 period. Now, y'all have to keep that in mind. If you're taking notes, write that down. The Iron Age 2A period is a known Israelite period. So you have to understand that. So when you're trying to teach or you're trying to learn or if you want to know what particular area that you need to dig into, it's the Iron Age 2 period. And that's the period designated by archaeologists. All right. And that's when we find a lot of material culture that backs up the presence of Israel in the Levant. So let's go. Israel as a person, people, region, and kingdom plays a prominent role in the biblical narrative. Israel literally struggles with God. It's first mentioned in the Bible as an alternative name given to Jacob after he wrestled with an angel. Genesis the 32nd chapter, 28 to 29. It also appears as a collective name for the 12 sons of Jacob, the children of Israel, the eponymous founder of the 12 tribes who traced their ancestry back to Jacob. According to the Bible, following the rebellion of the northern tribes, house of Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh, and the tribes of Galilee and Transjordan, against Solomon's successor, Rehoboam, Israel is used to distinguish them from the southern tribes, Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. Now, why does it say Simeon? Because if you read the Bible, it lets you know that Simeon had land within the borders of Judah. So Simeon was at one point a part of Judah, but if you read on and when you the separation of tribes, you know, it would seem that the Simeon went with the northern kingdom. But that's besides the point. Just a tidbit of information that you guys can research and read on your own. It says, Rehoboam Israel is used to distinguish them from the southern tribes, Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin, that remain loyal to the house of David. For example, e.g., anytime you see e.g., that's Latin for example, 1 Kings 12. The archaeology of Israel as a regional territory, also referred to as the Northern Kingdom, is the topic of this chapter. The earliest appearance of name Israel in the Pharaoh's Merneptah late 13th century account of his campaign to the Levant provides tantalizing clues to a pre-Iron Age Israel. Although there is a consensus that the hieroglyphs in his victory stela do translate as Israel and refer to a people. So I want that to be noted, that the consensus on the Merneptah stele is some people dub it the Israel stele. The consensus is that word there is Israel and referring to Israel and referring to a people. So anybody arguing that in 2021 that's a moot point at this point, because we just seen Zion Lex wash Tahuti from the Lion's Den on this same topic, because this is clear. It's the consensus and it's clear. Now, but it also has a caveat. And a lot of times you read these books, they give you pros and cons and objectivity. This is Oxford. They're just trying to put the information out there. You know what I'm saying? So they give you pros and cons. So it also says this: the particular geographic region inhabited by this group remains less certain. So they say, although it says and states that Israel was a polity and an actual people, it doesn't tell you exactly, according to this book, exactly where it was, or there's no certainty exactly where it was located. But if you read the rest of it, like Zion Lex was bringing out, then you can make a approximation of where this was. Approximately 350 years passed until Israel as a political entity and territorial kingdom reappears in a non-biblical text and inscriptions. So you have extra biblical resources and sources that show that these people actually existed. So it's most notably the Tel Dan and Mesha stele. In addition to the biblical account, especially 1st and 2nd Kings, the most important sources for constructing a political, social, economic, and material culture history for Iron Age Israel include Egyptian, Assyrian, Moabite, and Aramaic royal inscriptions, ostraca, and other inscribed objects from the southern Levant. So the ostraca are the pottery vessels and shards that had writing on it. And all of these things point to the existence of Israel being a political entity, something that these guys are still struggling with in 2021 because of their bias, because they're cynics and they're dilettantes. So as any archaeological evidence includes surveys and excavations. For an overview, see Grabe 2007. That gives you some additional reading that you can do. Territorial definition. Attempts to reconstruct the borders of Northern Kingdom during the Iron II period. And I also want to make this, before I read on, I also want to make this noted. The archaeologists use the Bible in their studies. That means what? That they don't treat it like you cynics do. They see historical value in the records. You're going to see why. Let's keep reading. Attempts to reconstruct the borders of the Northern Kingdom during the Iron II period, century 1000 to 600 BCE, rely on biblical descriptions of tribal boundaries in the book of Joshua, chapters 13 and 19. In the 12 administrative districts of Solomon, as outlined in 1 Kings 4, 7 through 19. The historicity of these boundaries is debated from viewpoints which range from maximalists and minimalists. Additionally, the territorial and political borders of the Kingdom of Israel fluctuated over time according to historical circumstance. For the purpose of this chapter, Israel is defined geographically as encompassing the northern central hill country bordered by Bethel in the south, the Galilee bordered to the north by the Litani River and mountains of Lebanon, and to the east by the Golan Heights, and Sharon Plain in the Jordan, Jezreel, and Hule valleys. Phoenicia lies in the north and west, and Aram and the Aramean territories mark the northern and eastern limits, with Judah and Ammon forming the eastern and southern borders respectively. This geographical designation does not necessarily reflect shifting political, cultural, religious, linguistic, or ethnic boundaries that the region witnessed during the Iron II period. Historical and chronological cornerstones. This is big. It says the dating of Iron II sites, particularly strata traditionally attributed to the 10th and 9th centuries BCE, remains a topic of spirited debate. Why? Because that's the period that many people attribute to the Solomonic and Davidic kingdoms. The reign of David and Solomon. And there's a lot of debate because there's a paucity or lack of evidence of any temples or anything, but we do have mention of David. So we'll get into that when we get to the Judah portion of this book. At stake is the historical reliability of the biblical account describing a highly developed 10th century united monarchy during the reigns of David and Solomon. Challenges to the reliability of a nearly century-long tradition of ceramic analysis that formed the basis for dating Iron II strata, and questions regarding state formation in southern Levant. Pharaoh Shoshanks or Shishak's campaign to the southern Levant in 926 BCE is the most significant 10th century chronological linchpin. Although the historicity of this event is not disputed, the nature, extent, and physical evidence and locations mentioned in this itinerary are debated. And one thing that is mentioned in the Temple of Karnak, which shows that Shishak actually knew the geographical distribution of these cities, and they line up with the Bible geographical distribution of the cities and naming of the cities. One of the names in particular is the Fort of Abram. So that name of Abram, being as it relates to Israel as a polity, was known in the 10th century BCE, and most likely built to venerate his name. You understand, and venerate his history and his legacy. All right, let me keep reading. We're back in the book now. For recent treatment for the parallel biblical account, see 1 Kings 14:25 to 28. So the Bible talks about Shishak as a real entity, a real person, and discusses that he actually ransacked Israel, and that's been verified by archaeology. You understand? So that gives the historical reliability argument to the Bible more strength. Neo-Assyrian military incursions in Israel, which culminated in the conquest of the capital city Samaria by Sargon II in 722-721 or 720 BCE, serves as a 8th century chronological pegs for dating Northern Kingdom Iron II sites. These events, often also attested in the biblical account, together with the Syro-Palestinian inscriptions, are invaluable for our understanding of Iron II Israel. So these events about Sargon II, the invasion and everything is all attested with the archaeological record. Again, making the Bible and the biblical narrative historically reliable. It says, among the later groups of texts, the most noteworthy include the Tel Dan and Mesha Stele and the Sumerian Ostraka. For a recent analysis of these texts within their larger historical and archaeological context, see Rainey Notley 2006. So the thing about the Tel Dan and Mesha Stele, and we're going to get into, is they both mention David. Let's go. Moving on. Archaeological evidence from surveys and excavations. Settlement patterns during the Iron Age 2A period. Survey conducted in the Central Hill country, Samaria, in the Jezreel Valley in Upper and Lower Galilee provides the framework for reconstructing Iron Age settlement patterns. The result presents a mixed picture of Iron II settlement in northern Palestine. Surveys in the Upper Galilee indicate a decline in settlements from 71 documented sites during the Iron I, dropping to 36 settlements in the subsequent Iron II period. Part of the perceived decline may be due to the difficulties in precisely dating the Iron Age ceramics collecting during the survey. In the Lower Galilee, surface survey has revealed a different settlement picture. During the Iron IIA, earlier Iron I settlements were deserted and appear to have been replaced by new large fortified sites. In the southern sector, a number of fortified settlements are documented due to the paucity of late Bronze and Iron I settlements in the northern region of the Lower Galilee. The increase in rural settlement activity during the Iron IIA is particularly noteworthy. And it also shows a lot of rural activity, shows a lot of farming, especially in this region of the earth, in the Levant. That shows that these people were agriculturalists. You know what I'm saying? They were dealing with agriculture, horticulture, and viticulture. You know what I'm saying? Viticulture is dealing with winery and wine presses and stuff of that nature. Reading on in the book, by the later 9th century, some of these settlements were abandoned, which Gall attributes to the Aramean threat. The population increased during the 8th century until the Assyrian conquest, which resulted in the devastation of the Lower Galilee. Several centuries passed before the region began to recover from the Assyrian destruction and deportation, meaning the event that was written and recorded in the Bible about the Assyrian incursions and invasions of Israel actually took place, and we have what we call archaeological visibility. We can see it in the archaeological record. When it happened, we can see the decrease, the deportation, the destruction, the burn layers, so on and so forth, that show that a foreign people came in and ransacked this place, deported people, the whole nine. So the biblical narrative was correct about this particular historical event. It says Zerzel's landmark survey of northern Israel, or northern Samaria, the territory of Manasseh, demonstrates a doubling of its number of sites from the Iron I to 2, reaching an apex of over 300 during the 9th and 8th century BCE. Most of the Iron II sites are newly founded. So the way I interpret this data, again, using heuristic method, is, of course, we're going to get a population boom from Iron I, Iron II, because Israel is starting to grow, flourish during this period, because, coming from Egypt and then actually inhabiting this land, getting used to the land, cultivating it, and then population growth is going to come. All right, so it says approximately half of these are farmsteads, 1/3 are villages, and the remaining 20% are towns and cities. cities. On the basis of his survey results, Zertel concludes that the majority of the population lived on farms or in villages. Again, like I said earlier, most of these people lived on farms and villages. They were heavy agriculturalists. They were dealing with farming, livestock, stuff of that nature. Back to the reading. Smaller numbers of enclosures, cave sites, fortresses, tower camps, and cultic sites have also been documented. Following the Assyrian destruction of Samaria in 722, there was a dramatic decrease in settlements that he attributes to the Assyrian deportation and resettlement policies. I also want to point out this, the cultic sites. These include different altars. The Bible talks about multiple places of altars and multiple places of sacrifice. But for some reason, people think the only place that you could sacrifice is in Jerusalem. That is a lie. That's a farce. That is not even supported with the biblical narrative. They go to Deuteronomy, they run Deuteronomy 16. So with Deuteronomy 16, that says that one place that we all should go. You know what I'm saying? But you got to understand that the biblical narrative tells you there are multiple altars to go and have sacrifice. And there was Israelites in all of the suburbs and cities. Levites, There were Levites in all of the suburbs and cities for that particular purpose, to serve the Most High and do what? Deal with the sacrificial law, deal with the sacrifices. Meaning, if you lived in the most extremity of northern Israel in Beersheba, you stayed all the way up there. Dan, if you stayed all the way in Dan's territory, you didn't have to go all the way to a centralized point to get sacrifices. You went to your local Levite or Levitical priest in the suburb that nearest to you to give your sacrifice, to do the cultic practices, and so on and so forth. So if anybody's on here and they're running with that narrative that everybody had to get sacrifices done in Jerusalem, that is just completely false. There's no historical proof to that. And there's no archaeology or anthropology that would even show that. We had altars set up all throughout Israel, you understand, for that purpose. So keep that in mind. Back to the reading. We're on page 756. It says, further to the south, Finkelstein and Letterman's survey of the territory of Ephraim revealed a similar settlement pattern. The late Bronze Age is represented by only a handful of sites. The Iron I period witnessed a noteworthy increase in settlements, with nearly 100 sites attributed to the Iron I, Iron II transition. So again, we're still seeing a population increase, more activity, more cities being built and erected from the Iron I to Iron II period, which is a known Israelite period, which is very telling because we got a movement of people coming into this area, cultivating this place, building upon this place, and growing. And we see the population growth within the archaeological visibility. We see more pottery, we see more food storages and stuff of that nature to show and imply, okay, now these people are growing. They're growing, they're getting bigger. All right, reading on. It says settlement density peaks in the late Iron II period, with over 200 sites identified, representing one of the most densely populated periods in this region. Two views have emerged regarding the interpretation of this survey data. Gao and Foss propose an abandonment of villages at the end of the 11th century BC, with the population shifting to fortified settlements. In Foss' opinion, this abandonment of rural sector represents the emergence of an Israelite polity that coincides with the rise of a 10th century united monarchy in the southern Levant. Others have challenged his interpretations on both methodological and archaeological grounds. Finkelstein and Hesrog disputing the claim of widespread desertation of rural settlements and pointing out that the early Iron II centers are largely administrative, not residential. The debate remains unresolved. So again, these debates unresolved because again, they're doing abductive reasoning like you would do abductive reasoning. But I would side with Foss. I believe Foss' interpretation of the data lines up more. You understand? With this is the emergence of the Israelite polity. It just makes sense, and then it would explain why Merneptah is even mentioning Israel as a people. You understand? Because there's already a polity booming and growing and going into these different fields of trade, farming, archaeology, and building, and inducing a population growth. All right, so let's read on. It says, The debate remains unresolved. Survey evidence presents a partial and unstratified record of the past. This, combined with the problematic nature of understanding of ceramic development during the late 11th and 9th centuries, especially in rural areas, limits our ability to interpret the data. So again, that's why the debate's unresolved, because there's nothing definitive. And that's why a lot of times when we get into these arguments, I remind people that this is not definitive. We have to use the heuristic method. We have to use abductive reasoning, deductive reasoning to actually come to a conclusion. And that's 96% of history, actually. 96% of history is like this. It's not definitive. But a lot of our critics and a lot of the cynics out there act as if information is definitive, and it's not. And you learn that when you start reading these collegiate books. Get away from Sonnet, or get away from YouTube, get away from Garfield, and start actually reading these collegiate books for yourself. And you're going to see how honest these people are in their research and discernment. They don't present it as this is the holy grail, this is the doctrine. No, they show you pros and cons, they show you objectivity, and they show you, okay, this guy's arguing this party's arguing that. And they move on and tell you the reality is that when we're looking into the past, we're looking, like the Bible says, through a glass darkly. There's just a lot of things that eroded over time. A ratification has took place. A lot of things have been destroyed, misplaced. A lot of things we still don't understand that distorts our understanding of deep history. And that's just the facts. So let's read on. The rise of regional kingdoms Israel during the 10th and 9th centuries BCE, Iron IIA period, traditionally dated to the 10th century. The Iron II period has been linked to the United Monarchy in the biblical account. More recently, however, this association has undergone intense scrutiny. At stake are the historicity of Kings David and Solomon and the nature of state formation in the region. A re-examination of the ceramic and stratigraphic evidence combined with the analysis of hundreds of carbon-14 samples indicate that the features associated with Iron IIA period extend into the 9th century. Based on these recent studies, estimates for the beginning of the Iron II period ranges in the date between 980 to 920 BCE, continuing through the mid to late 9th century. The latter part of this period coincides with increased Aramean interactions with Israel. Aram's incursion into northern Palestine are best illustrated by the Tel Dan stele, which contains the victory boasts of an Aramean king, most likely Hazael, who had conquered the city for a recent discussion of the stela. In my discussion of Iron IIA, I follow Herzog and Singer-Avid's 2006 division into two phases, the early and late Iron IIA period. So what we're getting is more archaeological visibility and seeing and comparative analysis of the historical reality of the Bible and these things being recorded. We know there was a King Hazael. We know there was a Aramean influence or incursion into Israel because it's written and recorded in the Bible. These things reflect the time periods harmoniously. And you can't take that away. I know that makes a lot of you upset. I know it makes your stomach turn, but it's just the truth. It's just the truth. These things will reflect archaeological reality. It says the initial stages of Iron II are identified by distinctive change in material culture, most notably red slipped hand burnished pottery. In northern Palestine, many Iron I sites are characterized by the continuation of late Bronze Age Canaanite material culture, especially at sites located along the coast or in the valleys. Some of these Iron I settlements met a violent end. At other key sites, early Iron II strata rest on scant remains and are on occupational gap or represent a newly established settlement. The early Iron IIA is often characterized by modest, unfortified settlements that lack large public structures, especially domestic structures. And that goes back to when I was debating my brother James. A lot of Israel seemed to be utilitarian, meaning they viewed each other as equals. Viewed each other as equals, and they did everything for the common good and not for the individual for the most part. You understand? And we can see that reflected in their pottery. At Dor, for example, let me touch on that even more. In a flashy society that's not utilitarian, you can tell who's rich, you can tell who's poor, because you'll look at the things that's within their household. You'll see, okay, this rich man has decorated pottery. You understand? With stripes and all type of decorations, and you can see that. But within Israel, you have plain pot. A lot of it they're digging up is plain pottery. It don't matter who household it is in. It's got a lot of plain pottery, and it looks at, you can't tell the difference between the person that had less and more. And that's what really egalitarian, utilitarian society. That's what that reflects in the field of archaeology. It says the early Iron 2A is often characterized by modest, unfortified settlements that lack large public structures, especially domestic structures. Reading on, it says, at Dor, the transition is more complex during the early Iron 2A, which equals Gilboa, Sharon's transition Iron 1 to 2. An urban coastal Canaanite Phoenician culture continues, punctuated by a material cultural break in an appearance of red slip hand burnished ware and imported black on red ware during the subsequent late Iron 2A. The larger settlements of late Iron 2A are typified by public architecture marked by the construction of residence palaces, large royal enclosures, and high places. Early phases, fortifications including walls and gates at the number of sites, Jezreel Yokneam stratum 13, and Hazer strata 10 to 8. And clear signs of increased prosperity and political consolidation. A remarkable aviary from Rehoboth stratum 5 also dates to this period. In addition to the elite-controlled centralized religious centers, such as the high place at Dan, there's also evidence of popular cultic activities, some clearly in domestic context. These include offering stands, model shrines, and incense altars. Again, to recapitulate on what I said earlier, there were plenty and numerous altars throughout Israel. Why? Because you had plenty places where you can go and give sacrifice to. There was not one centralized area in Israel that you gave sacrifice to. That's a farce. That's not reflected in the archaeological record at all. So just keep that in mind. It says, see especially Masar Panat's Cohen, 2008, regarding evidence of popular household religious worship from Rehoboth. The typical Iron 2A ceramic repertoire includes red slipped hand burnished bowls and jugs, carbonated craters, whole mouth jars, hippo type storage jars, amphoryscoi, and imported ware such as the Cyprot bichrome jug from Tel Rehoboth stratum 5. So obviously, if they were important things, they were dealing with trade. So now we're moving on to state formation and the rise of regional kingdoms. The appearance of impressive monumental public architecture and clear signs of political and economic consolidation during the Iron 2A period in Israel, considered together with the biblical account, have raised questions regarding the process of state formation during the early first millennium in the southern Levant. As N. Yofi 2005 points out, state formation is context-specific and should be considered within its broader individual, environmental, and geopolitical setting. Proposals range from the rise of ethnicized secondary states beginning in the 9th century, partially in reaction to the Assyrian imperialistic expansionist policies in the Levant, to interpretations that reject traditional statehood theoretical models such as kin-based, authority patrimonial relationships that served as a substratum throughout the Iron II period, or regionally based tribal states or kingdoms. These regional kingdoms, which flourished in the southern Levant during the first centuries of the Iron II period, ultimately succumbed to the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which again, the Bible does a great job of reflecting this history, and we can see it all being dug up and being presented in this Oxford Handbook of Archaeology of the Levant. All right, and this shows you some of the altars. To the left, this is an Iron 2A altar. And then we got some ceramic assemblages and vases and stuff like that that was being dug up in these areas. All right. In the shadow of the Assyrian Empire, Israel during the late 8th centuries BCE, Iron 2B period, is that the decline of Aramean influence in Israel's affairs coincided with an expanding Assyrian Empire, as expressed by intensified commercial and trade relations with the West and increased military campaigns to the Levant. The Assyrian imperial relationship with Western regional kingdoms, including Israel, is best defined as one between an imperial power and client states who acquired wealth via tribute from its vassal kings and war booty. Assyria's primary motivation, underlying campaign to the West, seemed to be mainly economic, with the goal of controlling trade routes in Western Asia. In particular, access to the Phoenician ports, thus the purpose of clientship that characterized Assyria's relationship with Israel during this period was mainly related to the control of goods and surpluses rather than territory. So it was like, you can stay in your land, but we want to cut on everything y'all got going. We want 10% off top. Like the government get 30% off top. They get they cut off top. They like, you can stay in your land. We're not really worried about taking your territory like that. You know what I'm saying? We will send some people over there and make sure everything's straight, but just pay me my money, fool. That's how they was operating. Let's keep reading. You know what I'm saying? They were like the mob. We would hate for anything to happen to it. That's a nice palace you got there. We would hate for anything to happen to it. Be ashamed for anything to happen to it. What the Godfather said, I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. All right, it says, freed of Aramean interference in the early 8th century following Adad-Nirari, the third subjugation of Damascus, the kingdom of Israel experienced a revitalization that resulted in territorial growth and economic prosperity, particularly during the reign of Jeroboam II. Archaeologically, this is expressed at Dan with additional development of the high place. In city fortifications of Stratum II, both attributed to the excavators of Jeroboam II. The construction of extensive stables, fortifications, and other impressive structures assigned to Megiddo Stratum 4A, the massive citadel, and fortification system of Hazor Stratum 5A, the monumental city walls of Yokneam Stratum 12A to B, Samaria periods 4 to 9, or possibly period 2, Beth Shean Stratum 4, and the multi-towered city, three-way entryway and lower gate systems and palace 8,000 of Gezer Stratum. The expansion of Israel's cultural and most likely political influence is discerned at Dor sometime during the 9th and 8th centuries. This is best expressed by the Israelization of Dor's pottery repertoire, representing a shift from a northern coastal iron one Canaanite Phoenician tradition to one more closely affiliated with the inland Israelite assemblages. So again, more evidence of this time and the historicity of this epoch when Israel existed. Let me do this real quick because before we get back into the book, we're in 761 and 762. I would like to do this before I finish and complete reading this book. And I can't believe I forgot to do this, but we're going to do it now. Better late than never, right? I am able, under the Fair Use Act, I am well within my right to review, comment, and release information on copywritten material for scholarship and teaching purposes. And that's what we're doing tonight here. And that's according to Section 107 of the Copyright Act, which provides the statutory framework for determining whether something is a fair use and identifies certain types of uses, such as criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. And we're definitely doing scholarship and research tonight. And this is for the edification and teaching of the masses. So let's get right back into it. I want to make sure I threw that in there before I went any further. I just thought about it too, because people are trying to flag your channel for every little thing. All right. We're going to keep these doors open. All right. So let's get back to it. Back to page 761, 762. Cultural and commercial interconnections. Two artifact assemblages, a group of ivories and collections of ostraca, both originating from Samaria, capital of the kingdom of Israel, provide invaluable insights into pre-Assyrian conquest, cultural, and economic systems. The Samaria ivories, comprising approximately 1,000 fragments, embody the prosperity and cosmopolitan character of Israel during the period and are alluded to in the 8th century oracles of Amos. This gives archaeological attestation to what Amos was saying, meaning Amos was recording historical reality. So a lot of you people that are cynics and going against the biblical narrative, or all of it's fake, you can't say that, because a lot of the things that are being written down are time specific. It's time specific. These people having these ivories, these people being a part of cosmopolitan, being prosperous at this time. He was recording that at that time about the Northern Kingdom. So you can't just dismiss everything just because. You have to study, you have to research, you have to dig. And that's what we do here at the source. All right, so let's read on. These ivory carvings are similar to the Phoenician style ivories discovered elsewhere, most notably from Nimrud, located today in Iraq. Although most of the ivories were found in secondary or disturbed deposits on the basis of typological comparisons, they most probably date to the late 9th to mid 8th century BCE. The presence of Phoenician-style luxury items, ivories, and metal vessels, and ceramic figurines, as well as the widespread appearance of utilitarian pottery vessels, such as the torpedo storage jars at both inland and coastal sites, attest to well-developed cultural and commercial ties between the Israel and Phoenician coast, especially with Tyre. So again, we're seeing more of these utilitarian pottery vessels, showing that the rich and poor, when righteous, they were seen as equals. It was a very egalitarian society, and Foss wrote a whole book about this, a whole entire book about the egalitarian nature of the Israelite polity. It says the Samaria ostraca are a collection of over 100 inscribed shards, of which 63 are legible. So I also want to touch on this before I continue reading this as well. A lot of people try to say, well, these people were illiterate. No, they were not. No, they were not. They were nowhere close to being illiterate. Many of them knew how to read. We even have evidence that commoners knew how to read and write, because we got these ostracas owned by commoners that were writing, and they were, of course, they're writing, they're able to read. Okay? So if anybody making that argument in 2021, their information is outdated or they don't study, you wouldn't have a collection of 100 inscribed shards with writings on them if they were illiterate. Just doesn't work that way. Traditionally dated to the reigns of both Joash and Jeroboam II, are only to a period of the latter's rule. These inscriptions preserve administrative notations of wine and oil shipments from agricultural estates in the Manassite tribal region to the capital city. These ostraca provide an unprecedented glimpse into the socioeconomic relationship between Samaria's royal center and elite members of the Mennonite king clans and its hinterland, and geographical insights that include a corpus of place names within the tribal inheritance of Manasseh. All right, moving on to the Iron II Sea period, Israel under Assyrian rule, late 8th to 7th centuries BCE, and the impact of empire. The relationship between Assyria and Israel deteriorated during the second half of the 8th century, characterized by the increasing unrest and even open revolt against Neo-Assyrian policies in the region. Military intervention and campaigns of Israel escalated. The Northern Kingdom was conquered in two waves during the reigns of Tiglath-Pileser III, 733 to 732 BCE, and later by Shalmaneser V or Sargon II, 722 to 721 or 720 BCE. Attempts to correlate these documented historical events, and particularly the accounts of conquest and destruction as depicted in the biblical and Assyrian sources with stratigraphic sequences at key sites, are central in efforts to establish Iron Age II chronological benchmarks and to reconstruct a political history of Israel. Heavy destruction layers from Tiglath-Pileser 732 BCE campaign has been identified at Dan. So again, this has been stamped. This is a historical account. We can see it in the archaeological record, which gives it archaeological visibility. There's no question that this stuff happened. There's nothing to question. It happened. Exactly when the people that the Bible attributed it to these events is recorded in history. And we can see the destruction layers. We can see it in the archaeological record. So there's no way around it. All right, then it lists the cities. It goes from Hazar, Bethshan, Rehob, Megiddo, Yokneam, and Dor. For analysis of destruction levels associated with Assyrian military actions in Iron II sites, the Neo-Assyrian response culminated in 2 waves of destruction at numerous cities in Northern Kingdom, including its capital, deportation of a significant number of Israel's inhabitants to Mesopotamian towns, and their replacement by foreign populations from elsewhere. Again, it says C, e.g. again, that means, for example, 2 Kings 17:24. So they're looking at the archaeological record and saying, well, we're referencing this and doing a comparative analysis with what actually the Bible says. And it lines up. It lines up with exactly what the Bible says. And then when we read Tudor Parfit's work, he told you in his work that it has been proven because they have pulled up documentary evidence and shown that there was an assimilation of Hebrew Israelites within the Assyrian army, showing that there was a movement of people and displacement from Israel into the Assyrian city-states. That's been proven. That's not even questioned. So the historicity, as far as 2 Kings 17:24, has been validated and vindicated. There's no way around that. Let's keep reading. The actions also triggered a massive influx of refugees from the north of Judah, resulting in a massive expansion of Jerusalem at the end of the 8th century BCE. So you had these northern Israelites fleeing the Assyrian incursions and invasions to the south. They went and fled to Judah. This also kills the notion that all of them just disappeared and evaporated during this period. Anyone teaching that all of northern Israel just evaporated or got taken out or just disappeared, you're lying, or you just not studied. Many of them would escape, and naturally you would do this. You would escape to a more safer polity or kingdom, which at this time it would have been Judah. They were just more stable. They were more stable at this time. So it's I got brothers down south. Let me just go to my family house down south. It's not safe up here no more. These Assyrians ain't playing with us. Let me pack up my bags and go down south with my family. And that's exactly what we see, because there was a population boom during this period, indicating that you had people coming in from the north and from the south. And guess where we can find this information? In the Bible. You can find this information in the Bible when Josiah annexed some cities and from the northern kingdom, and a lot of these Israelites would come and still worship in Jerusalem. That's recorded. That's reflected in the archaeological record. Let's keep going. Following the region's conquest, Assyria administratively subdivided the territories previously under Israelite and Aramean control to 6 Assyrian provinces, including 3 west of Jordan River, Megiddo, Samaria, and Dor. Archaeologically, the impact of Assyrian rule is most apparent in construction projects that heralded the appearance of new architectural traditions at select sites. Excavations at Megiddo provide our best example of an Assyrian administrative center. The Stratum III city is constructed on a well laid out orthogonal plane that included geometrically shaped insulae, domestic quarters that constitute 75% of the site, a public granary, and Assyrian-style public buildings consisting of a series of rooms around a central courtyard that closely followed Assyrian design. So this is how they know that you had Assyrian influence and incursions during this time. They could see it in the archaeological record. They could see these Assyrian-style public buildings and structures. And this is also how you argue for anybody moving. You can see some of the material culture coming over. Like when my recent argument or recent presentation I did within this year about the Luso-Africans, we can see Luso-African material culture in Brazil to let you know that a movement of people actually happened. They took that material culture with them from the coast of Guinea, Senegambia, Senegal, and they brought that culture, that Portuguese style house, with them all the way into Brazil, and because a lot of the slaves that were Luso-Africans would have had that knowledge, and a lot of the slave traders that were Luso-Africans would have had that knowledge, and they would have took it with them and built them homes. That's how you argue. That's how you show material culture, and you can show a movement of people through the translation, a transposition of material culture. It's just that simple. All right, so back to the reading. It says, surveys have revealed that the province of Megiddo in the Galilee experienced a dramatic reduction in population. However, Assyrian policy varied from province to province as it is reflected in archaeological record. In contrast to Galilee, the regions of Samaria underwent a building and population boom, presumably as a result of the arrival of new peoples. Assyria's imprint is evident, but not dominant in other aspects of Israelite 7th century material culture. Excavated Assyrian-style objects include clay burial containers, pottery, glyptic art, and metal vessels, and other objects which appear alongside local Phoenician and Greek-style material culture. At Tel Rehov and nearby Beth Shean, evidence of swatters settling on the ruins after the Assyrian destruction was uncovered. So just as the Bible says it, you had these foreigners coming in and being placed in there by the Assyrians, which was an Assyrian practice at that time, which shows you that they're recording something that actually happened. They actually did this, which gives the historical reliability of the biblical narrative points. Because this was actually going on. And the Bible talks about this. The king putting in these foreigners, and they were swatting the temples and everything. And according to the Bible, he sent lions to kill them, if y'all know the story in 2 Kings 17. You know what I'm saying? But the point is, that actual event of the king placing these people in there and they're being considered swatters, there's evidence of that in the archaeological record. It says, at Rehov, several burials that included Assyrian-shaped vessels suggested the excavator that Assyria may have established a modest settlement in the site as yet undiscovered, similar to the Assyrian period citadel established at Hazor. Assyrian provincial rule was short-lived by the final decades of the 7th century. Assyria was in retreat during the twilight of the Assyrian Empire. Biblical tradition portrays an assertive Judah, which briefly extends its influence into the lands of the former northern kingdoms. 2 Chronicles 34, 3 and 7, only to fall prey to Egyptian and Babylonian imperial ambitions. So again, we can see through archaeological visibility that these events played out. These events played out. The names of kings are there. The description of what actually took place are there. And we're digging up the earth and we're seeing these archaeological layers and stratum showing the story that we're reading about. All right, so that's the end of this chapter. We're going to move on to the kingdom Judah, in particular, the polity known as Judah. And what are you talking about? Hey, Claims, what are you talking about? Hold on real quick. Let's take a small commercial break. He tried to prove God exists to Satan. Who's doing that? Are you saying me? I'm providing education, man, and edification to the people. This is for scholarship and research purposes. That's the point of doing this. So those who want to learn, they can learn. Like the scripture says, those that hear and those that forbear. So you're either going to listen, learn, and take this information and this data and grow from it, or you're just not going to listen to it at all. That's fine. The information is going to be out there. We got 31 viewers in the building tonight, man. Shout out to the family. Shout out to y'all. We appreciate your support. Hit that like button. Hit that like button. There's 31 people in here. It should be 31 likes, man. The more likes you get, it works towards our algorithm and it helps us get exposure. So if you want to see us grow and expand and do greater things where we can go to museums and do live videos and stuff like that, then you're going to have to support the channel, man. Hitting that like button is free 99. It's free 99. It don't cost you a thing. And support the people that actually read, man. Y'all can see I'm an avid reader. I love to read. I do that on my off time, my free time. I read a lot. And I just can't give you guys enough information. I'm going to continue to push here on the channel on the source from Genesis 49 is to keep feeding y'all this information, right? Keep giving y'all what I receive, because it just being stored in my brain is not going to be beneficial to anybody. All right, so let's go back to the book. So we completed the chapter dealing with the kingdom of Israel, the polity known as Israel, in the archaeological record, and those things that reflect that as actual history. That's why this is important. It's showing that these things actually took place in times past. All right, so let's go. Let's go. Let's get to Judah. Boom. Chapter 49. Judah during the Iron Age 2 period. Iron 2 by James W. Harding. Iron 2 Judah, which lasted some 400 years, circa 1000 to 586 BC, has attracted as much interest from archaeologists as perhaps any place on the earth of similar size and duration. What has been revealed through archaeological investigation is small, territorial, and or tribal-based kingdom with a settlement pattern that differed markedly from the preceding Iron 1 and with a recognizable material culture that developed out of local traditions. This chapter provides an overview of what has been revealed archaeologically, while taking into account more theoretical considerations for processing the archaeological data and critically referring to some textual sources. First, Judah's boundaries are identified. Next, the archaeological remains from the 10th century through the beginning of the 6th centuries are outlined. Discussed within this outline are Judah's material culture, its suggested social and political organization, its relationships with its neighbors, both near and far, and its religion. Borders. While the borders of Judah shifted, the backbone always was the Hebron Ridge, which runs south from Jerusalem through Hebron before dropping into the Negev desert. To the west were the forests and maquis of the Judean hills, which dropped gradually to the low, rolling hills of the Shephelah and coastal plain. To the east were more arid environs, and arid just means you can grow stuff on it, that dropped more perceptually into the Jordan Valley and Arabah. Judah's northern border generally followed an east-west line just north of Jerusalem to the vicinity of Gezer, which straddled the Via Maris. From Gezer, the western border of Judah ran southward, where the Shephelah gave way to the coastal plain down to where both meet in the Negev desert north of Beersheba. I also want to point out this for this. A lot of people make erroneous claims about the land of Israel. They might look at things and how it is now, but back then, during this time, the land was plentiful. The land was arid. We just read it. You can grow, you can farm. There's a lot of agriculture going on down there. So a lot of people are like, well, no, nobody want to go to that desert. Nobody want to go to that dirt bowl. But at this particular time and at this particular point, it wasn't like that. Business was booming over there. Agriculture was booming, man. You know what I'm saying? Hey, Judah and Israel make the farm say, hey, hit the like button if y'all know what I was talking about. If y'all got that reference, you as old as me. Make the trap say, hey. If you got that reference, you about as old as me. If the Hebron Ridge was the backbone of Judah, the Shephelah was the heartland and the most densely occupied area for much of its history. During times of prosperity, Judah was able to extend its political sway further south than Beersheba, certainly to Kadesh Barnea near the brook of Egypt, likely to the fortified caravanserai of Kuntilit Arjud, perched atop a hill overlooking Gaza Gulf of Eliat, Akiba trade route, and possibly even to the Gulf of Eliat, Akiba region. So again, the Bible gives that same or similar notion that the land is extended all the way to the brook of Egypt. And that's really attributed to David and Solomon when you read the biblical narrative, and we find evidence of that. The eastern border of Judah generally followed the Arabah up to the western shore of the Dead Sea before turning west toward Jerusalem near Jericho. Exactly when the kingdom of Judah existed within these borders is a topic of heated debate. This Iron Age 2A period, right? 1930 BC. W.F. Albright was among the first to associate specific archaeological remains with historical events taking place during the 10th century BCE, his Iron 2A, and to use them to demonstrate the historicity of the monarchy established by David and Solomon. However, this widely accepted association has been challenged over the last 2 decades on the basis of 2 debates. The first is historical and concerns the veracity of the biblical text and is beyond the scope of this work. The second is the archaeological attempts to re-anchor the well-established relative typological sequence of the Iron II material culture. Finkelstein recently suggested that Iron 2A materials traditionally dated to the 10th century BC should be actually redated to the 9th. This removes all remains one might associate with an emergent state as biblically recorded to David. So just notice those that are opponents to what Albright was saying, they're actually trying to shift archaeology instead of keeping it where they found it at. And where they found it at will line up greatly with the David and Solomonic thing, the notions of them actually being a kingdom. It says, biblically according to David, the destructions at Quazil Stratum, Megiddo Stratum, and Solomon, the gates of Gezer Stratum and Megiddo Stratum, and Hazor Stratum. See 1 Kings 9:15 for the reference for that, and associate them with events surrounding the divided monarchy almost a century later. To make this work, a flurry of reshuffling has been undertaken to undo established relationships between archaeological materials and historically known events, especially military campaigns of Pharaoh Sheshonk or the Arameans Bir-Hadad and Hazael. Carbon-14 dating has been employed extensively in this debate, with both sides demonstrating some support for their temporal conclusions. So again, that's always the caveat. You got pros and cons, both sides having evidence on both sides, because again, we're looking at history through a glass darkly, and that's the best way I can give it to you. Again, 96% of ancient history is like this. 96% of it is lost to us. So we can only use inferential data, abductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, and the heuristic method to try to piece this thing together. It says, while the lower dates have gained some support, most archaeologists still lean toward the more traditional chronology. And anytime this says traditional, it's referring to biblical as well. A recent suggestion for moving the archaeological debate forward was made by Mazar, 2005, following Barcade, 1992. He suggests a longer duration, 150 years, than most archaeologists presently accept for the Iron 2A archaeological materials. Mazar's case generally supports the traditional chronology while allowing for a longer continuation of the assemblages in question. Regardless of its absolute date, the archaeological data suggests a marked change from the preceding Iron 1 period. And that, from my analysis of the data, that change from the Iron 1 period is because the influx of Israelites and the Israelites moving into this period and growing and booming and establishing themselves. That's why. It says many of the typical Iron 1 farmsteads and villages are abandoned, destroyed, or morphed into the towns and cities of the early Iron 2. Foss has noticed that, at least in the highlands, virtually no Iron 1 settlements continued as a rural villages or farmsteads into the early Iron 2A. While there are a number of small Iron 2A settlements and farmsteads dotting the central Negev highlands, these are accompanied by 50-some fortified enclosures, giving the appearance of a deliberate effort to settle the area and control trade moving through it. Royal efforts, see Cohen, 1979. Other Iron 2 settlements throughout Judah began modestly, some without fortifications, but they grow into the fortified towns and cities, regional centers, and fortresses occupied throughout Iron 2. Some notable examples that developed into fortified towns and cities include Tel El Ful, the Gibeah Stratum 2, maybe a little earlier, Jerusalem Stratum, Gibeon, Nasbe, Bethel, Tel Kasil Stratum, Beth Shemesh Stratum, Tel Batat Stratum, Tel Zayit, Kerbet El Quam, Tel Bet Mersim Stratum, and Tel Halif Stratum, though poorly known. developing regional centers, including Lachish level 5 and Beersheba strata 7 to 6, and fortresses and caravanseries include arid strata 12 and 11, Kadesh Barnea, early fort, Kuntilit, Adrud, Kerbet, Kayafa, and perhaps Heshi stratum 9. That Kerbet Kayafa is a bombshell, and Israel Finkelstein wrote a great book on that. And I'm looking for the book as I'm talking. I can't see it. It's called The New Kingdom of Israel. And he mentioned that in his book. Or The Forgotten Kingdom of Israel, excuse me. I have the actual hard copy somewhere here in my room. Anyway, great book on that. Good analysis on that. He actually gave more evidence to the historical reliability of the accounts. He gave a lot of credence to the book of Judges. Really awesome book, great book. Hopefully I can cover it on the channel one day. Let's keep reading. Faust suggested a number of possible explanations for this shift to an urban settlement pattern, including nomadization, economic opportunism created by new markets, especially in the lowlands in Shephelah, ecology, less rain, more silting and salting. Number 4, presenting methodological constraints, making identification of early rural Iron 2A sites difficult. Outside threat, Philistines and Egyptians, or forced settlement by newly established monarchy. Now, again, if it's a forced settlement by a newly established monarchy, then that gives credence to the Davidic and Solomonic theory that these was influences by those kingdoms ruled by David and Solomon. It says, given the recent settlement of sea peoples to the west, textual assertions to the presence of other elements, Egyptian and later Arameans, and on the basis of extant archaeological data, false number 2, 5, and 6 are the most plausible explanations and probably important for political changes accompanying or causing the settlement pattern shift. Remember, we pointed out number 6. Let's go back. They're saying that's the most plausible. A forced settlement by a newly established monarchy. That would give credence to the Davidic and Solomonic argument. So it also said 6, 5, and 2. So 5 says outside threat, Philistines and Egyptians, which did exist, right? The Philistines were enemies of Israel at the time. And then we go to number 2, economic opportunism created by new markets, especially in the lowlands and Shephelah. And we know, and we're going to deal later on in this chapter, that they were dealing with trade. So all of that makes sense. And they're saying those are the most plausible, 2, 5, and 6, which gives credence to the biblical narrative. False numbers 2, 5, and 6 are the most plausible explanations and probably important for political changes accompanying or causing the settlement pattern shift. Late in Iron 2A, a number of sites were destroyed or abandoned. Destructions are noted in Quisil Stratum 8, Gezer Stratum 8, and Timnah Stratum 4. Several of the central Negev highland fortresses, which are all abandoned at this time, Kadesh Barnea, probably Gibeon and Bethel, and possibly Arad Stratum 9. Traditionally, these were associated with Pharaoh Shishak around 925 BCE, whose Levantine campaign is detailed in a relief on the Amun temple at Karnak and referred to in the biblical text 1 Kings 14, 25, 29. So again, we have evidence of an event recorded in the Bible being dug from the earth in archaeological records, giving more credence that these things were written during that time and observed by people that lived during that time, boosting and bolstering the historical reliability of the biblical narrative. Proponents of the lower chronology implicate in these destructions endemic warfare or perhaps campaign Arameans. So again, I don't rock with the lower chronology because you have to do all this like shifting of archaeology instead of just dealing with what you see. You understand? Regardless of causes, the archaeological picture during the Iron 2A is one of increasing urbanization and centralization, perhaps even ethnic consciousness. So again, this is what we all expect to see if the narrative is true about the Davidic and Solomonic and the population boom of Israel going into these places and settling and creating and becoming this great policy. Great policy that we read about. We expect to see urbanization. We will see centralization and ethnic consciousness. You will see all these things. And that's what we see. That's what's being reflected in the archaeological record. As this book puts it, the archaeological period during the Iron 2A period. These changes culminate in the formation of a monarchy, certainly by the mid-late Iron 2B, a period when we have much better synchronism between archaeological record and contemporary historical documents, especially those of the Neo-Assyrians. While it is problematic to determine archaeologically when state formation first occurred and how it was done, the Iron 2A archaeological data certainly suggests trends in that direction. In addition to increasing urbanism, archaeological data demonstrate a recovery during the late Iron 1, early Iron 2A of the long-distance trade typical of earlier periods but recently dormant. Blakely noticed a striking similarity between a map created by Khashoggi, which identifies a location known Iron 1, Iron 2, and A tripartite pillared buildings, usually associated with stables and our trade, and a map of the borders of the United Monarchy as described in 1 Kings 4, 7, and 19, and discussed by Harpin. The location of these buildings along the borders of Judah and Israel implicates the monarchy's responsibility in their construction and maintenance to make sure trade items moving from areas from Arabia and Africa pass through their Israel and Judah territories. So again, the Bible having more historical reliability within its narrative because it's making sense and it's meshing well with the archaeological record. It makes sense to place these cities where they are because you're establishing trade and you're making sure that it's along the trade route. So people have to come through you to trade goods. It's just smart, it's strategic, and you're ensuring that your place is getting the economic benefit from trade. This trade would have been administered from the newly forming regional centers, fortresses, and the caravanseries, which the caravanseries are like big, large stationary motels where people will come in and trade and stay and so on and so forth. Economically, this trade would have supplemented agriculture, viticulture, horticulture, animal husbandry, textile weaving, all evidence archaeologically in Judah and Israel, and probably other locally produced goods as well. So these people were rich off trade. They were dealing with trade. They were involved in trade. And that's clear. And we can see the biblical account lining up with the archaeological account, showing that, okay, where they're saying that these places were put and built, it seems as if they were built on the trade route. Not even seems as if. You can see that they were built on the trade route. It says, though trade reemerged during Iron 2A, the traditional Near Eastern power centers were unable to dominate or directly control the southern Levantine corridor. In the forming power vacuum, spaces opened for local populations to expand their own contacts. The local leaders who took advantage of this may have been elites at city-states or perhaps rural headmen or tribal leaders who began coalescing kin-based groups into larger tribal entities of folks who may even have been linked by cosmological or theological orientations. Whatever the case, some polities managed to expand, control, and maintain areas large enough and eventually reach a level of social political complexity high enough to allow for their consideration as small states. For Israel and Judah, the biblical texts tell us that the reorganization began with the rise of David and Solomon, who began to effect changes in all facets of society. Politically, a king involved in problems of state, military campaigns, judicial matters, border control, etc., was installed. A new elite class was formed, and positions of service and servitude were created. A new capital was established by David at Jerusalem, a site not embedded geographically, politically, economically, and socially in northern and southern territories and groups. The town and crown were legitimized by the state-sanctioned coat of Yahweh, brought to Jerusalem by David and institutionalized by Solomon. On the basis of the archaeological evidence from Jerusalem, however, we cannot say much about these processes, as little iron 2A material has been recovered from the city of David excavations, mainly due to the latter removal of earlier materials and limited access to excavation areas caused by modern development and problematic political and social religious issues. The absence of iron 2A evidence from Jerusalem has been cited by some as evidence for the absence of a politically powerful united monarchy in the 10th century BCE. And that, my friends, is an argument from silence. That's your biggest argument. Oh, well, we don't see that much evidence for this period. It's because what was just listed. A lot of things were removed because of the place got sacked. Jerusalem got sacked, and a lot of the land got ransacked by foreigners. We understand that. And then now you have limited access to the excavation areas because of the modern state of Israel and the beef they got with these different Arab tribes, and that madness is going on. So there's a lot of political reasons as well why they can't excavate as much as they want to. They have limited access to excavating these areas. And religious issues, like they feel like this is sacred ground and you can't dig here. You understand? That's just how they go. And that's the harm of dogmatism. It stunts growth. It puts a limit on what we can know because, okay, these people feel like this is ancient ground. Therefore, we can't even learn about what happened here in times past because they don't want us digging here. You know, it's just unfortunate. Very unfortunate. All right, let me keep going. All right. Iron 2B period 930 to 700 BC. In the early Iron 2B, there is a continuation of the trends toward increasing urbanism, demonstrated by the increases in size, number, and new appearances of fortresses, regional centers, palaces, and fortified cities, towns, and villages. These developed along borders, major thoroughfares, crossroads, or a limited number of locations that adequately met certain needs. A constant water supply, arable land, and a defensible position. Again, arable land is talking about is able to grow crops. These needs limited settlement size during the Iron 2 to 8 to 10 acres, with population of perhaps 5 to 1,000 people. Most estimates for Judah's population during the 8th century are between 150,000 and 200,000 people. Already in the 9th century BCE, if not earlier, public works included fortifications, gates, towers, walls, mainly solid, but later casemates and glacis. Glacis are like ramparts, like slopes that give you a military advantage. If you're in a city, you put these slopes up, and if anybody that's trying to attack you, they got to go up that slope. And now they're literally fighting an uphill battle. That's where that saying comes from. And you can, if you're an archer, you just stand up at the top of the hill and you pick them off. Reading on, it says water retrieval and storage systems demonstrating an understanding of hydrology. Complex water systems have been discovered at Gibeon, Jerusalem, Gezer, Lachish, and Beersheba. More typical are many cisterns hewn out of bedrock and lined with plaster are drainage systems, which include channels and gutters that move water into cisterns or out of towns. Other examples of public works and planning including administrative buildings, large storage buildings, Beersheba, El Hesi, Lachish, and Gezer, houses forming a perimeter around settlements and blocks of buildings. More recently, other elements have been noted, including cosmological considerations for orientation of doorways and gates, and the maintenance and free and quick access to city walls via corridors strategically located to link the city wall to the inner ring road, aiding the defense capabilities of settlement. Outer ring roads have been identified at Jerusalem and Beersheba. I also want to point out on this page on 771, it's talking about their understanding of hydrology and irrigation and stuff of that nature. That's one of our arguments that was diffused into Africa. We could see that knowledge being carried there. So that's one of the arguments and proponents of our argument for Israel movement or people from this region moving into Africa. It says during this time, 3 3 or 4 room houses become the dominant architectural type in Judite settlements. And that's why it's also an argument wherever we see these 3 or 4 houses, we say, well, those are Israelite homes. Those are built like Israelites because we see that being dominant in these regions. This house type, probably indigenous to the southern Levant, first proliferated in the small, spatially liberal Iron One settlements and was easily adapted to more crowded fortified settlements of the Iron 2B before disappearing completely at the end of the Iron Age. So again, it says this was probably indigenous to the southern Levant. Why is that important? Because we see these houses in Egypt, in Avaris, where the Bible says that our people were located at. You understand? Where we were at during the occupation or a period of time that we dwelled in Egypt. We see those houses there, and then we see those houses leave and go to the Levant again. So again, a great way of tracking people is tracking material culture. We can see the people move because we see that material culture move with them. Let's read on. It is an astonishingly uniform house type, generally ranging in size from 35 meters to 80 meters square. In a few examples, more than 100 meters square. They frequently exist in Iron II settlements and peripheral ring backed against or built into fortification systems. In inferior spaces, they were clustered into smaller groups, districts, or quarters. It is likely that the clusters were occupied by extended households of probably 2 or 4 generations, or perhaps larger kinship groups at the clan level. They probably would have been patrilineal, patrilocal, and endogamous, and belonging to a larger collective also based on kinship, real or fictive. A pattern typical throughout the eastern littoral or of the Mediterranean. Judite burial practice closely resembled the architectural features of the 4-room house. These tombs, known especially from the 8th century BCE, typically contain individuals of both sexes and all ages, accommodating 15 to 30 individuals. It seems reasonable to assume that each tomb represented small extended households serving as a dwelling or house for the deceased. So that makes sense. So it's like you had the house of Joseph, then all of his family will be buried in that mausoleum, which is powerful. We were able to have an inscription that said, "This is Joseph," or any Israelite. You know what I'm saying? If you bring up this is Ahab, and we had an inscription and we knew that this was the burial practice, then we could say, well, this is the family of Ahab as well. We have his wife, we have his children, we have his progeny, we have his posterity right here. That would be amazing if that was ever the case, By late Iron 2B, 8th century BCE, Judite occupation reached its greatest extent with regard to population and settlement size and number. This increase is especially evident in Jerusalem near the end of the 8th century, when this population exploded and the size of the city increased dramatically. One possible explanation for this population increase is the influx of refugees from the northern kingdom after its fall to the Assyrians in 722, 721 BCE. So again, anyone pushing that the northern kingdom eviscerated and they just effaced off the face of earth, that's not true. A lot of them fled into Judah. Now, the evidence for this is when you go to the New Testament and Christ was dealing with a sister from the tribe of Asher. He was speaking with a sister from the tribe of Asher. That's the northern kingdom. That's proof that you had the northern kingdom going into Judah. And they were running away from this Assyrian occupation. And also the book provides you a visual of the 4-room house. This is the plan of a typical 3 or 4-room house drawn by Dale M.P. Cargis. So that'll give you a visual of what was actually being discussed. And this will be known as an Israelite house. So if you see this, because we saw this in Avaris before, then we see it coming from Avaris to the Iron 2A periods, and we see these houses there. So we can see the movement of these people because they're bringing their architectural ideas and construction into that land. We can say, okay, these people that had that knowledge in Egypt made their way back to the Levant because it started in the Levant, then transitioned itself into Egypt, and then back into the Levant. Let's keep going. During the last third of the 8th century, the Neo-Assyrian Empire came to dominate the Levantine events by wielding its military might. I'm sorry, I got to say something else to that. So anybody doubting the Exodus, okay, fine, doubt the Exodus. But we can show a movement of people We can show a migration. We can show that. That's easy. All right, let's read on. Especially in siegecraft and reducing smaller states and kingdoms, including Judah, the vassalage of client status. Judah was essentially left unmolested so long as it remained loyal and protected and nurtured Assyria's economic and political interests in the area. Because remember, we read earlier that Assyria was like, they were hustling, really. They were just hustling people. They didn't care about your land. Look, just bring me my money, man. Do what you want to do down there. Worship Yahweh, whatever. Just bring my money, man, by the end of the month, man. Don't make me hurt you, man. That's how the Assyrians got down. They were the mobsters. They were the mobsters of the ancient world. It said this included passing along taxes and duties as annual tributes, serving as a buffer between Assyria and its enemies, especially Egypt. Aiding in the consolidation of Assyrian military presence and keeping open the lucrative trade and commercial routes that passed through the territories. Remember, we read about the Levantine corridor, which was a rich spot, a rich trade route where a lot of trade was going up and down, and that's why it makes sense of the city placement that you would want those cities placed on the trade route so you can control that. So they got to go through you to even access the trade route. So you always getting paid off of that trade. You understand? The Assyrians saw that, like, let me go down there and occupy that. It says aiding in the consolidation of Syrian military presence and keeping open the lucrative trade and commercial routes that pass through its territories. Failure to comply could lead to the penal reduction of the kingdom through military occupation, a fate that befell Judah at the end of the century. So again, like, you got a nice kingdom, be ashamed if something happened to it. That's how the Assyrians got down. And when you defied them and you didn't bring that money, you know what I'm saying? Like Big Worm told Smokey, you play with my money, you playing my emotions. And they got down like that, man. And they didn't, bro. They went through destroying and causing mayhem if you didn't bring them that money, that tribute. Let's keep reading. Assyrian military activity began to impact Judah directly during the reign of Assyrian Tiglath-Pileser III, 745-727. His successor, Shalmaneser V, 727 to 722, and Sargon II, 721 to 705, conquered Israel, destroyed its capital, and deported and or replaced its population. Perceiving Assyrian weakness after the death of Sargon II, Judah under King Hezekiah, 727 to 698 BCE, a king noted by biblical writers for his piety and early prosperity, for example, 2 Kings 18, 1-8, Isaiah 38, 10-20, revolted against his Assyrian overlords. The events surrounding this episode produced perhaps the most amazing convergence of historical and archaeological sources of data in the entire Iron Age. So a biblical event is the most amazing convergence of historical and archaeological sources, because in other words, the archaeological record is like in complete harmony with the historical one. Let's go. Now let's move to the Iron II period, 700 to 586 BC. Assyrian texts describe how Sennacherib, 704 to 681 BC, was greeted to the throne with open rebellion throughout his empire. So these are Assyrian texts, extra biblical texts saying this. Hezekiah, for his part, probably stopped paying tribute, perhaps encouraged by Babylon, Tyre, and Egypt, and began taking territories from vassals who remained loyal to Assyria. For example, Ashkelon and King's Potties Ekron, while strengthening his own cities and often laying stores, including goods distributed in Malak stamped storage jars. Jerusalem's massive solid wall enclosing the western hill and its water tunnel connecting the Gihon Spring with the Siloam Pool were probably part of these efforts. 2 Kings 20:20. Sennacherib responded in 701 BC as attested in biblical texts. 2 Kings 18-20, 2 Chronicles 32, Isaiah 37. Assyrian records of the Sennacherib prism and on the dramatic bas-relief on the walls of his throne room in Nineveh. So again, all these events are complemented by the Assyrian writings. All of these biblical events are complemented by the Assyrian writings and records. There's no way around it. Archaeological attestation to Assyrian activity in Judah are prevalent. Nearly every Iron II site investigated in Shephelah and northern Negev regions yield a destruction level probably associated with Assyrian campaign activities. For example, Beth Shemesh, stratum 2b, Gezer, stratum 6, Batash, Timnah, stratum 3, Ira, stratum 7, Mahata, and it continues. So we're going to move on. None of these yield evidence so dramatic as largest regional capital of Lachish, level 3, sitting atop a high mound surrounded by a double wall and gate system. Revealed here are a siege ramp along the southwestern slope, a counter ramp inside the city, and massive burning throughout the city, accompanied by many arrowheads, slingstones, scale armor fragments. In a mass grave, over 1,500 individuals beneath the site. These remains provide one of the most important linchpins for correlating a historically recorded event with a specific material culture of the Iron Age. And this correlation is one of the few almost unanimously agreed upon among scholars studying Judah. Let me read that again. This correlation is one of the few almost unanimously agreed upon among scholars studying Judah. So an event in the Bible is unanimously agreed upon? I thought you Negroes were going across the internet all over social media saying the whole Bible fake, ain't nothing in it real. You guys are silly, man. Let's keep going. Life after Sennacherib. The Shephelah and northern Negev never fully recovered from the devastation wrought by Sennacherib, as evidenced by the decreased number of sites there. It seems likely that the Assyrians forced mass deportations of inhabitants, or due to the Hezekiah's rebellion, removed Shephelah and northern Negev from the Judite autonomy, meaning control. However, not all regions suffered so greatly. From the archaeology, it appears that areas north and east of Jerusalem, ancient Benjamin, experienced continued occupation without interruption. Also from archaeology, Jerusalem and its environs continue to experience heavier population densities than any other areas of Judah. So keep in mind, you had these refugees coming in; they were flocking in. So that can explain these heavy population density, this population boom going on during this time. More marginal regions were also settled during 7th and early 6th century BCE, and intentionally than at any other time during the Iron Age. This especially includes an unparalleled wave of settlement in the region of Judean desert between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea, from the Bakwai to the vicinities of Jericho and En Gedi. Grain from this area had been found in Ashkelon, attesting to the regional trade in which Judah participated. The Beersheba Basin experienced the same kind of extensive expansion as the eastern deserts. Perhaps these expansions originated in the immigrants from the Shephelah. Apparently, a reconfigured Judah continued to prosper as a vassal of Assyria until the campaigns of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar in 597 to 586 BCE. These were as devastating as Sennacherib's. Affected sites including En Gedi, stratum 5, Arad strata, Harvat strata, and it gives you another list. It says, with these activities, the kingdom of Judah and Iron Age came to a close. So we all know that, and that's congruent with the biblical narrative, because that's when the temple fell, when the Babylonians came, right? And then we were kind of in shambles after that, and into Queen Salome and the Maccabean revolt and the Hasmonean dynasty. Then we kind of got some steam and reestablished ourselves as governors, but we were still under somebody. You understand? We never really shook back from that. Let's keep going. Cultural finds. Archaeology demonstrates that the kingdom of Judah carved out a niche for itself among the Levantine entities in the imperial states that constantly threaten its autonomy. Its similarity in full integration with its neighbors is seen in epigraphic finds, its counting systems of weights and measures, and its religion. Writing materials in Judah are known from its very beginning of the Iron Two. So again, going back to the earlier statement that I made, a lot of you people saying that all of Israel was illiterate and these people were dumb and all that. That's not true. These people there's evidence of them having writing material since their beginning in the Iron Two, all the way back to 1000 BC. We have the ostraca, we have the vases, we have that of writing, people writing. So that argument is dead in the water. It says when the Phoenician alphabet was adopted and developed as a local Hebrew version, the earliest Iron II alphabet-based texts known from Judah notably include the Gezer calendar and the Abecedary from Tal Zayed and a large ostracon from Kerbet Kayafa from the 9th century. Two very important inscriptions for the history of early Judah, but not from within its geographical territories, are the Bet David Aramaic inscription from Dan and the Mesha stele from Deban in ancient Moab. Both mention the house city of David. So this is epigraphic evidence that David existed. And a lot of you guys want to argue it. And the kingdom of David existed because it says house or city. And so you guys want to argue that, but we have epigraphic attestation to his existence, or the polity, or the kingdom, or the city, or however you want to put it. There was an explosion of writing during the 8th century when stamp seals with Egyptian rather than Mesopotamian iconography, scarabs, winged griffins, etc. Boule writing on ceramic vessels and monumental inscriptions become more common. Important inscriptions in iconography from Kuntilat Azrud exist mainly as graffiti on walls, jars, and bowls. Notable among these is the mention of Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah, and depictions of individuals, gods, goddesses, which provide a glimpse into the religious practices of this site and suggest a possible connection with Israel. Now, a lot of people look at this because this is true historicity that they did couple Yahweh with Asherah. But they were like, well, this is the right way to worship him. No, but you have to also understand that we had syncretism. Syncretism is the blending of different religious ideas. So we would take Asherah and then blend it with our own Yahweh and say, okay, Yahweh and Asherah are together. And this is the female part. This is the male part. But there's no evidence that that is the original or official way to reverence Yahweh. In fact, the biblical narrative actually condemns that Queen of Heaven stuff. You know what I'm saying? So just a tidbit of information. It says another inscription mentioning Yahweh and his Asherah was discovered in a tomb at Kerbet El Quam and in the Hebron area. Both of these lend evidence to the prominence of Asherah and the cultic activity in Judah, possibly as a consort of the male deity. An invaluable collection of ostraca was excavated from the southern fortress of Arad, Fortress Strata 8 to 7, providing a window into the royal presence in the southern portions, the southeast portions of the kingdom. Commanders of fortresses are mentioned along with the king of Egypt, Greek mercenaries, Edomite confrontations, royal Judite policies, and the dispensing of food supplies. In Jerusalem, a dedicatory. So, with all that being stated, we have written evidence, documentary evidence of Edomites, royal Judite policies, and all this other stuff. So it's like we have the attestation from the archaeological record that these things did take place, that these people were a kingdom, these people existed. So anybody trying to argue against that, you're dead in the water. You're not studied. You're a dilettante, don't have knowledge, and you don't have a commitment to even learn this stuff. Let's keep reading. In Jerusalem, a dedicatory inscription from Hezekiah's water tunnel and inscription in the Silwan tomb provide examples from the kingdom's capital. Another important collection of 18 ostraca was found in a room off of the piazza at Lachish Gates. Collection of bullae are well known from the 7th century, including a collection of more than 50 from a burned house in Jerusalem. Also from Jerusalem is the 7th century silver amulet from the Kefet Hinnom tomb incise with the earliest known fragment of the biblical text, Numbers 6:24-25, which that also proves that we had a written Bible at this time, because we have a verse. Now we have a verse that survived from this time period. While this list is not exhaustive, it demonstrates the high level of literacy among royal administrations. All policies by the 8th century and possibly already in the 9th. A system of measures and weights was in some ways were inscribed with Paleo-Hebrew or Egyptian hieratic numeric values representing fractions and multiples of 4 shekels. Weight units appears to follow the Egyptian rather than the Mesopotamian system. Goods moving through Judah include gold, silver, copper, bronze, iron, other metals, ivory, precious and semi-precious stones, rare woods, monkeys, horses, textiles, cyprot, and East Greek pottery, and especially perfumes, oils, wine, fish, Mediterranean now, and other victuals, all attested archaeologically for trade. All right, so again, this was a hot spot for trade, and these are the things, a lot of commodities that were moving through there. It says, with regard to the cultic activity, a picture is developing of religious activities that were much like those of Judah's neighbors. Apparently, the orthodoxy described in biblical texts was not the norm for the most times, as some texts assert, 2 Kings 6:10, Jeremiah 7:18, 7:9, and 1:5. From the 10th century, cult room 49 is known from the Lachish level 5, complete with stands, horn altar, chalice, and other objects. An 8th century domestic shrine at Tel Halif contained the head of a pillar figurine, fenestrated stand, 2 shaped rectangular stands, and possibly a standing stone. The ubiquitous pillar figurines found throughout Judah, especially in domestic context, have been associated with the goddess Asherah by some, but understood as votives by others. They were probably used predominantly, if not exclusively, by women, thereby demonstrating women's active roles in the ritual activities. That's also a highlight, because a lot of y'all go, well, the women had nothing to do with what y'all had going. No, that's not true. The Bible even tell you that the women were at the tents of the ritual places, so that don't even make sense. But here it's giving more attestation that women were involved with the cultic or ritual activities in Israel and Judah. Any discussion of religion in this period must include Solomon's temple. To date, there are no known archaeological remains securely associated with this structure. However, its description is rooted in religious architecture of Iron Age Canaan, including its tripartite plan known in northern Syria, double columns in Tel Kassil, and use of cedar as building materials, Lachish and Tel Kassil. An 8th century temple was found deliberately buried at Arad, complete with tripartite divisions, a sacrificial altar made of filled stones, and a niche of Holy of Holies with 2 altar stands and 2 standing stones. And going over this is showing that that style of temple or building was the norm in this place. So this could easily be a historical reality that took place at this time, because we have other examples to go off of and do a comparative analysis, compare and contrast on the account of Solomon's temple. It says, at Beersheba, the stones of a dismantled horn altar were found reused in the storehouse. The burying of the former and dismantling of the latter may have been associated with the biblically described cultic reforms of either Hezekiah or Josiah. Over 20 tumuli were found in the area of Jerusalem with perimeter walls, large platforms, and paved areas, and some pits and enclosure walls. Many were filled with burned animal bones. These have been associated with high places or royal cenotaphs. So again, going back to people that's going around teaching that, oh, well, Jerusalem's the only place you can sacrifice. So how do you explain all these burnt bones everywhere? Obviously, they were sacrificing in multiple localities and locations. That's obvious. So I'm talking to you Hebrew Israelites that run to Deuteronomy 16 and say, well, Deuteronomy 16 is saying that you have to do the sacrifice in one place. That is not historically attested. That is not true at all. Let's keep reading. Also near Jerusalem is the enigmatic Cave 1, which contain many bowls and other ceramic forms and other types of figurines. Based on the discussion above, a setting is revealed where not only religious specialists but all members of society participated in religious activities. The abundance of cultic, and that goes back, that part right there, all members of society participating, that goes back to an egalitarian society. Let's keep reading. The abundance of cultic materials, the types, and their context suggest that Judite religion was steeped in Levantine traditions where food or liquids were presented, libated, and or consumed. Anointing or ritual purifications and cleansing were performed, and sacred or communal meals were served and consumed by the Judites, their guests, and their deity. For some 400 years, all of these acts ensured the company of the deity and secured the participants' relative well-being as they experienced life among the other groups in the Levant. This very brief overview of the small territorial kingdom of Judah imparts only a very small portion of what has been revealed through archaeological investigation and critical analysis of biblical and other textual sources. It also attests to how the state of our understanding of Iron II Judah in the context of its neighbors continues to be refined by immense and continually growing data available to the researchers. All right, so we did the archaeology on Israel, the northern kingdom, and we did Judah, which is the southern kingdom. I wanted to include Edom in here as well. Just, put a nice little bow on this. Let me see what's going on with the chat. 28 viewers. Shout out to everybody. Yeah, shalom, Plumantis. Shalom. Appreciate the love, man. You on every video. Hit that like button. Everybody hit that like button. Subscribe to the Source Debate League. You support us. We support y'all with content. We'll feed y'all with content. We're going to break down more books, more pertinent information to your walk and to your understanding of Israelite history, African history, African American history. We're going to cover and hit all fronts here at the Source. You understand? We don't just do debates here, man. This is Source Media, Source Gang, and we go straight to the source. All right, so we covered Northern Kingdom Israel and the Southern Kingdom. Now we're going to move to Edom, and we're going to conclude this. Let me get to Edom real quick. Let's go to the contents. Let me get straight to Edom, because Edom's not the next chapter over, so I have to actually select it. Hold on. Let's get to it. Iron II period. Here you go. Israel, chapter 49. Edom is actually chapter 52. Let's get to it. All right. Edom during the Iron Age 2 period. I think this is only like 10 pages. The other one's like 20, so. Because there's really not that much on Edom, but I figured that we covered Edom because a lot of brothers talk about Edom, the Edomite kingdom, who the Edomites were, and it seems to be very important to a lot of brothers' walk. So I want to cover this tonight along with the archaeological history of the Northern Kingdom and Southern Kingdom. Edom during the Iron Age 2 period. This was actually put together by Piotr Kowalski. The nature of the evidence, as with any geographical area of or chronological period, what we can say with confidence about Iron to Edom is constrained by the nature of the evidence and the type of archaeological work carried out and published. The particular constraints from Iron to Edom are that much of the evidence comes from surface surveys. Relatively few sites have been excavated, and even fewer of those have been published in final form. Indeed, at time of writing, only 3 Iron II sites in Edom have been properly published in final form: the Tawilin, the Busera, which is Bosra in the Bible. That's how it's translated in English, Bosra, and al-Biyara. This makes it difficult to give an authoritative or comprehensive overviews of sites and finds. Other than the 2 fully published sites, the rest of the evidence available falls into the following categories. Surface surveys carried out in the 1930s by Nelson Gluick. More recent intensive surface surveys, some fully published, others only ever published in preliminary form or still ongoing. Excavation, which were either published only in preliminary form or technically problematic, thus leaving many problems unresolved. For the excavations at Tel al-Khalifa, Ongoing excavations, which had yielded some preliminary publications, but often without details or finds of contextual data. So again, there's a paucity of evidence backing this stuff. So really, a lot of this stuff, like what's been being said in preface here, is speculative. But that's fine because, again, you're going to have to use deductive reasoning. You're going to have to use inferential data on a lot of this stuff because, again, a lot of things get lost over time. And this area is not really well studied pursuant to what this author is saying. Archaeological coverage of Edom in general, including the Iron II period, is extremely patchy. Large areas have still not been systematically surveyed, and even those that have been surveyed more intensely give us data that is not stratigraphically controlled. This means that questions about precise dating, use of sites, and nature of material culture cannot be answered effectively. These constraints should be borne in mind when reading this section. The other types of evidence which have a bearing interpretation of Iron II and Edom are Hebrew Bible. So they use the Hebrew Bible as evidence, like we read earlier. That's what these archaeologists are doing. You know, the book that y'all said is all fake, they actually use it to do a comparative analysis. This mentions Edom directly as a neighbor and frequent enemy of Israel and Judah, but the historicity of many of the passages is disputed, so they must be carefully evaluated in order to extract worthwhile historical information. Again, they're still trying to extract worthwhile information. Contemporary historical references, Edom appears in the Egyptian, Assyrian, Neo-Babylonian inscriptions, and these are useful for evaluating Edom's relationship with imperial powers. So again, we see their name in these different records. That means that they were a real polity and they existed in times past. There's no way around that. Epigraphic sources, a few inscriptions on the Bulle and Ostraka have been found from Edom itself. While the information they provide is of limited use, occasionally the royal names can be connected with those in the Assyrian inscriptions to provide a useful dating framework. Now it moves to dating. Exact dates for Iron II settlements in Edom cannot yet be established with certainty. There are four sources for dating. A bulla from the stratified context at al-Biara, the inscribed belonging to Kos Gabar, king of Edom, has been dated on the paleographic grounds to the first 3/4 of the 7th century BC. It is possible, though not certain, that the name, the same as Quasgabri, king of Edom, known as the Annals of Assyrian Kings Esar-Shaddon, dating to 673 BC, and Ashurbanipal, dating to 670 BC, which would provide a more precise date. The identification is plausible, but it cannot be discounted that the Bulle refers to another Kos-Gabar, king of Edom, later in the 7th century BC, since no names of kings of Edom are attested in the Assyrian annals after 667 BC. Nevertheless, a date within the first 3/4 of the 7th century BC is certain. Also want to point out on this point that this name Kos, or QOS, Gabar, is theophoric. Theophoric means bearing the name of a deity. So what this may reflect is the deity that the king of the Edomites that were worshiping at this particular time was Kos, the god Kos. Or some people spell it Kos. Sometimes you see it spelled QOS. Let's keep reading. Inscriptions on Ostraka from Busra or Bosra, al-Biara, and Tal al-Khalife, and a Neo-Babylonian bulla from al-Biara are dated by paleography and parallels the symbolism between the late 8th and 6th centuries BC. Pottery assigning precise dates to Iron II pottery from Edom is hugely problematic. Until a few years ago, it was widely believed that Iron II settlements in Edom and associated pottery dated between the 8th and 6th century BC. Recent work in the Fainan area and reevaluation of the pottery from Bosra have caused these dates to be stretched both early and later. In the Fainan area, pottery from Barca, al-Haiti, Kabat, and Nahas has been associated with carbon-14 dates in the 9th century BC. The Bosra pottery dates between the late 8th century in the 300 to 200 BC. The later date indicated by the presence of Attic and Hellenistic shards alongside characteristic Iron II pottery. Late Iron II forms appear to continue virtually unchanged to the end of the Persian period and perhaps into the early Hellenistic period, with the probable addition of some new forms, but no discernible break between the periods. Radiocarbon dates from the Finland area have claimed to show settlement there between the 12th and 9th century BCE, which is what we expect to see. We expect to see Esau alongside Israel, existing during that time, because if we're going off the biblical narrative, they were already a polity, and we had to go when we left Egypt. We had to actually go through their territory. So if the narrative be true, then I would put them 12th to 9th century BCE, because they would have to already exist for us to walk and traverse through their territory. However, at the time of this writing, the context of those dates have not been published nor any associated pottery. Furthermore, the claims for the early 12th, 19th century settlement are based on artificially pushing the carbon-14 dates on average 100 years earlier than the standard calibrated radiocarbon evidence allows for, using the Bayesian calibration system. Furthermore, when a different Bayesian calibration system was used as a test, the results differ significantly. The fainted carbon-14, therefore, must be used with caution depending on whether they have been calibrated by the Bayesian system, and this has implications for interpretation of early Iron Age settlement, metallurgy, and statehood in Edom. Currently dating evidence indicates some activity in Fainan region between 12th and 9th century BCE. The vast majority of the sites in the Edomite plateau flourishing between the late 8th and 6th century BCE in continuity of settlement at certain sites through the Persian period and perhaps into the early Hellenistic period. The tribal kingdom model and alternatives. This is the next portion. To the end of the 20th century, the Iron II in Edom was interpreted almost exclusively according to an understanding of the archaeology derived from the Hebrew Bible. We can term this traditional or biblical archaeology paradigm again. So anytime you see in this book, and anytime you hear me read in the book, traditional view is dealing with the biblical view. I read that early, and I told you guys that. So Edom and its neighbors were interpreted as discrete, bounded nation states with formed political borders following the 19th century European model. Within each state, the material culture was linked to the ethnicity. So, for example, a particular type of pottery was identified as characteristically Edomite, and its presence was seen as denoting the presence of ethnic Edomites who identified with the nation state. The state of Edom was constructed as a centralized and hierarchical, with a king, a capital, a state, religion, and centralized administrative system. The presence of Edomite pottery, for example, outside the borders of Edom across the Wadi Araba in the Negev within was regarded as Judah, was interpreted as evidence of invasion, conquest, and settlement by Edomites. This traditional paradigm did not account for the complexity of archaeological record, and the Ben Kwaski and Van der Steen proposed a new framework building empirically on previous theoretical work. This approach is generally termed the tribal kingdom model. So again, this book is giving pros and cons, caveats. It's giving both sides. It's objective. So you're going to see both sides in this book. And that's why I appreciate about this, because when I have conversations with somebody, I'm able to have a more detailed, a broader scope on the information from the negative and the affirmative, because I'm reading something that's providing me both. So when you guys are going out and purchasing books, make sure you get those type of books so you know arguments. You're not blindsided by arguments because you read both sides already. And it's best to get books, not going through the internet scouring for articles, because those articles, now you got the articles are spread out. You got to type in this website, type in that website. As opposed to what I do, I get a book and the chapter would cover all of that. I just go to that one chapter and okay, I'll just read here. Refer to page 809 in the Oxford Handbook of Archaeology of the Levant. This is where I'm getting it from. Boom. It says everything I needed to say. So, just some advice for those out there that are studious and really trying to step up their scholarship. That's the route I go, and that's why I'm able to pretty much crush people on a lot of doctrine or debates, because a lot of the times I'm well accustomed to your side of the argument. All right, back to the book. According to the tribal kingdom model, the basic unit of subsistence in Iron 2 Edom, indeed throughout most periods of the southern Levant, historically is the tribe. A working definition of tribe is a small group defined by traditions of common descent, and this is how it's being used in the Bible, because so this is the tribe of Issachar, then they're commonly descent, or it's assumed that they're commonly descended from Issachar or Judah. They all descended from Judah. So this is the definition that we see being utilized in the biblical narrative. It says real or fictive kinship, generative genealogies, temporary or permanent political integration above the family level, shared language, culture, and ideology, inhabitants a core geographical area but can move around, contract, and expand depending on circumstances, can be sedentary, nomadic, or both, works together in such joint endeavors as trade, agriculture, house construction, conflict, blood feud, and warfare, and ceremonial activities. Usually composed of a number of smaller local communities and may be aggregated to temporary or permanent higher order clusters, confederations, nations, or kingdoms. We also understand that someone can be put in your tribe that's not related to you, which one of these definitions cover. We see that also in the Bible. We see an Egyptian being integrated or aggregated into the tribe of Judah by marrying a man's daughter. So we actually have examples of that as well, where someone didn't have common descent, patrilineally, but married into the tribe. And we also have the law in Leviticus, I think, 24, where someone can become a citizen of Israel, and they will have to accept our laws, of course, and they can become a citizen and be included with us. All right, let's read on. Based on such criteria in an archaeological model, the tribes in Iron 2 Edom would have been kin-based, partially range-tied and nomadic, and partially land-tied and settled with a mixed economy of pastoralism, agriculture, trade, protection, and copper mining. The balance changing according to circumstances. They would have had core areas, but moved around and negotiated movement across areas controlled by other tribes. They had relations with towns, nominal central governments, and imperial powers, but in practice they were independent, although clearly their ability to act independently was constrained, and their affiliation identity was to kin groups within a tribe, not to a kingdom. Within such a model, Edom was not a monolithic nation state, but a tribal kingdom composed of largely independent groupings, held together by bonds and cooperation and allegiance to a super-tribal monarchy at the so-called capital, Bosra, which was in fact probably more of a supra-tribal center. Each tribe continued to control its own area and had its own power base, so the relationship between tribes and between Bosra and other tribes were heterarchical, not hierarchical. These tribal groups did not suddenly stop their pastoral migrations when political Edom was formed, or more accurately, when a monarchy was generated from the tribal coalitions. They continued to move independently across the Wadi Arabah, and interacted with other groups from Arabia and the West. The tribal groups controlled and sometimes raided the incense trade between Arabia and the Mediterranean. The characteristic pottery of these different groups is found mixed together at the sites where they mingle, especially in Negev, and much of it was probably manufactured at these sites. Here, they probably had grazing grounds and engaged in small-scale agriculture. Other archaeological correlates of this model include the decentralizing of Edom with widely varying settlement types and ceramic assemblages between different regions. The Petra area of southern Edom, for example, having quite distinctive mountaintop sites and long room houses and a paucity of painted pottery. A critique of the tribal kingdom model by Routledge substitutes an alternative model of hegemony, focusing on Iron Age Moab as a case study. Routledge's definition of hegemony is a force and constant operating together, the cumulative effect of specific projects carried out by particular agents, the bounding of social space of state, and the differentiation of rulers from the ruled. Within this framework, he emphasizes the concept of segmentation as a form of identification, essentially. How identity is formed through differentiation and hierarchy in forms of taxonomic categories that can be applied to archaeological and historical evidence. Porter, 2004, has attempted to apply a rulerless framework established for Moab to the evidence from the Iron Age Edom in order to develop an alternative to the tribal kingdom model, focusing on ways the segmentary systems constructed promoted the ability of elites to organize disparate tribal alliances. Nevertheless, his basic premise is that Edom was a centralized hierarchical state within set borders, and in many ways, this is no more than an elaboration of a traditional paradigm. And again, when it says traditional, it's talking about Bible. So you have people constructing theories that aligns with the biblical narrative. The nature of Iron II settlements in Edom. There is no evidence for settlement in Edom during the Middle and Late Bronze Age. Egyptian inscriptions of the late 2nd millennium BCE record that Edom was inhabited by the Shasu, nomadic pastoralists who lived in tents and kept flocks of sheep. Current evidence suggests that in the early Iron Age, mining recommenced in Wadi Fanan. After a gap of nearly 1,000 years, ongoing work in Fanan area has proposed that there is carbon-14 and ceramic evidence for a main phase of copper production in the 12th and 11th century BCE. With the construction of a fortress at Kerbat and Nahas in the 10th century. It also has been claimed that the presence of the copper industry in the fortresses indicates state formation in Edom considerably earlier than previously thought. Problems with interpreting the carbon-14 have been outlined above, and our alternative proposal is that there's evidence at Fanan and ceramic, non-settled cooking activity and possibly mining by pastoralist groups between the 12th and 11th centuries, and some definite mining activity at the very end of the 11th century BCE. Burials carbon-14 dated to the 10th, 9th century BCE have been found in nearby Wadi Fadan. They contain beads, textiles, leather, metal jewelry, and wooden bowls, perhaps indicating that these were pastoralist groups known from the Egyptian inscriptions to have inhabited this area. The Nahas fortress belonging to the 10th and 9th century BCE was an isolated, short-lived phenomenon. Indeed, there are indications that its constructions were never completed, unconnected to later developments and state formation on the Edomite plateau. On current evidence, the activity of Fanan between the 12th and 9th century BCE is isolated from the rest of Edom. Outside the Fanan area, nothing has been found to the date to that period. There is no evidence of archaeological continuity between the Fanan activities and later developments of the Edomite plateau, particularly because so far none of the pottery from the ongoing excavations at Kerbat and Nahas has been published. Once it is, we'll be in position to reevaluate the situation. It is possible that the activities of the Fanan were connected with the copper mining and trade to the west rather than with the state formation settlement on the Edomite plateau. Iron II settlements on the Edomite plateau dates from the late 8th century BCE. From this date, surface surveys indicate intensive settlement across the whole of Edom, though a few sites have been excavated. I'm sorry, man. I've been working all day. Y'all gotta forgive me for that. But I'm back at it. Here we go. A characteristic of Iron II settlement in Edom is how very different the sites are. There is no consistency in site type, no hierarchy of settlements, and huge regional variation, which is what one would expect of the pattern of settlement in the hierarchical tribal kingdom with little central control. Bosra, often called the capital of Edom, and certainly the main city of Edom mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, was clearly some sort of administrative and religious center located in the north of Edom. So again, we have that parallel that we can dig up from history, showing that, okay, the capital of Edom is being mentioned as Bosra in the Bible, and we have some archaeological visibility to attest to that. It is a natural stronghold on a high spur surrounded on three sided wadis with a route leading towards the Wadi Araba and the crossing of Negev using the Arabian tribe. Excavations revealed 2 large public buildings, probably a temple and a palace constructed on stone and earth platforms, which raised them up above the surrounding houses. The whole area bounded by the perimeter wall. The architecture and town plan are quite unique in Edom. Certainly no other structure in Iron Age Edom has been identified as a temple or shrine. Many Iron Age settlements in Edom appear to have been open villages and farms such as Tawilin and Kirbat al-Mul-Alak is an exception since it was on spare surrounded by an enclosure wall, but is most likely to be interpreted as a fortified farmstead with perhaps some involvement in trade. Ongoing excavation at Kirbat al-Daba near Petra have revealed 2 large cassonate wall systems and 2 large rectilinear buildings, indicating that this may be more than simply an agricultural settlement. Tal el-Khalifa on the Red Sea is an enigmatic site, variously described as a border fortress and a grain storage facility or a fortified caravanserai. It was excavated by Nelson, who proposed 2 main phases: a casemate fortress, a 6-room building in the center, followed by fortified settlements with 4 chamber gates. However, a season of new excavations in 1999 by late M.L. Musil suggests a drastic revision in Gluick's stratigraphy and plans and questions in his divisions into strata. Khalifi's unique mixture of pottery of different origins and other objects strongly suggest that its role was connected with the Arabian trade as a gateway town on the Red Sea coast trade route. Now, I wanted to bring this out. I highlight that for a reason, because a lot of people say, well, the real Edomites are the Arabians, but you got to understand these people were interwoven and connected in trade. So, of course, there's going to be similarities between what we call Arabs and what we call Edomites, because they were trading with each other. And there's evidence with the pottery and the exchange of goods and materials that we see on the archaeological record to back that up. A particular characteristic of Iron II sites in the Petra region are mountaintop sites, El Biara, Sadeh, Jabal, Kiryat al-Mansur. These are barely accessible with no direct access to spring water. Cisterns are either rain-fed or water has to be carried up to the summit from springs at the mountain base. So this also attests to the biblical description of them living in mountains and stuff like that, right? I think Obadiah says in the mountains of Edom, if I'm remembering correctly. Let me open my book real quick. Go to Obadiah. Let me see. Am I remembering that correctly? Let me make sure. Let me fact check that real quick. Let me get there. Hopefully I got it highlighted. If I go to Obadiah, I think it says that. Let me see. Excuse me, y'all. Pardon me, y'all. I'm trying to find this real quick. 480. We almost done. This chapter not that long. I probably didn't read y'all little heads off tonight. But I wanted to cover this because I felt like this was pertinent information that needed to be out there. I don't see it in here, so I'm not gonna waste too much time. If y'all know what I'm talking about, just put it in the chat. I remember we used to be on the street. We used to go to, these people lived in caves, and we'd go to the scripture. Thought it was in Obadiah. I guess not. I'm not going to sit here and read through this. But there's a description of them living in caves and mountains and stuff like that in the Bible. Let me keep going. All right. These mountain sites are nevertheless situated among terraces and small fields that are suitable for small-scale agriculture, grazing, viticulture, and horticulture. The people living on the mountain sites obtain grain and other products of agriculture, presumably by exchange from sites of the plateau with whom they had a reciprocal but shifting relationship. Some of the characteristic longhouse buildings and installation of the mountain sites might have explained as secure storage areas. protecting foods and other goods that were painstakingly acquired and carried up. Many of the mountain sites have a pottery assemblage largely restricted to cooking and storage of liquid or grain, with little painted pottery. This lack of fine tableware may reflect the function of these sites. Some may have been temporary camps, although for the most, there is little to suggest they were not permanently occupied, but can also be explained in other ways, such as economic status or tribal tradition and cultural habits. The largest of these mountaintops is the Kiryat al-Masur. The summit and terraces have dense concentrations of dry stone buildings, apparently broad room houses divided into discrete areas on the northern, southern, and eastern ends of the plateau. There's evidence of a town wall with a gateway at another point on the basis of the surface survey. Concludes that the site was the second largest settlement so far discovered in Edom, after Bosra, and suggests it was a customs post on the Iron II trade route for copper from Fanaan and incense from Arabia, situated almost exactly halfway between Petra and Bosra. Let me check the comments real quick. Shout out to y'all, man. Y'all stuck through it. Hey, shalom, brothers. Appreciate that love. Hit that like button. Let me get back to this. And we're on the Edomite pottery. The regional variation in pottery throughout Iron II, Edom nearest the variation in site type. A type of pottery generally known as Edomite pottery is painted ware, particularly characteristic of Bosra. Hence, it also has been labeled Bosra painted ware. Approximately half of the bowls from Bosra were decorated, mainly with lines and bands of slip, and similar decoration appears also on many jars, jugs, and few other vessels. The most common type of decoration is an arrangement of concentric horizontal bands and lines appearing on most vessel types with the exception of cooking pots and lamps. An elaborate type of painted slip decoration consists of horizontal bands and lines supplemented with a variety of motifs, normally geometric, diagonal strokes, triangles, zigzags, tree of life, blobs and spots, and satires and cross-hatching. Denticulated decoration is found in Bosra, Kalefe, Tawilan, but is also particularly common in the Negev. Although denticulation is often regarded as a diagnostic of Edomite pottery, the fact that it occurs apparently in even greater profusion in the Negev perhaps suggests that this form of decoration common over a wide area, including the Negev and southern Jordan, rather than being specific to one group. The pottery assemblage at Bosra is very rich, and many types are not found elsewhere in Edom. Indeed, many of the parallels are from the Negev. This suggests an assemblage characteristic northern Edom and Negev demonstrably different from that in southern Edom. The most noticeable characteristic of pottery assemblage from el Biyara inside Petra are how restricted it is compared to Bosra, and the paucity of painted decoration in its relative simplicity. This suggests that there is a complex mix of ceramic assemblages through Edom, undermining attempts to define characteristic Edomite assemblages. So to the right, we got a visual aid, as they call it, of what they're actually talking about, the pottery. All right, so moving on to religion. The only temple so far tentatively identified in Edom is the area A building in Bosra. In its developed phase, it consisted of two wings, each with rooms around an inner courtyard. 4 symmetrically placed major doorways were found, 2 central and 2 off-center. The courtyard of the northeastern wing contained a stone-lined cistern associated with 2 drains, one emerging from a small room with a plastered floor and walls. At one end of the courtyard, stone paving led to shallow stone steps flanked by 2 circular stone bases bearing the imprint of columns, statues, or code objects. A small plastered room from which one drain exited might be identified as a purification room. This led to a long, narrow plastered room reached by steps described by a cellar or Holy of Holies, associated with 2 stone podia and copper alloy chair fittings, perhaps suggesting that it originally contained an impressive chair or throne. There was no direct access between the 2 courtyards, and it's possible that these functioned separately. There is no evidence from epigraphic finds or Hebrew Bible references to indicate the identity of the deity or deities who might have been worshipped in its temple. It has been suggested that the shrine at Horvat Kemet in the Negev was Edomite and dedicated to Kos, but the architecture and cultic finds there are completely different and cannot be used as a parallel. Nevertheless, there is some temptation to identify Bosra temple as dedicated to Kos, since two kings of Edom name compounded with the theophoric element, but this is speculation. So again, we have these kings named in the Assyrian list. We have some inscriptions from actual Edom showing this king named Kos Edom, and I think it's in the Bible as well. And that's theophoric in nature. For example, theophoric just means you have the name of a deity with your name. For example, Ezekiel has El in it, right? What's another one? Jeremiah has Yah in its name. Those are theophoric names, giving veneration to a deity. So we see that with Edom, Kos Gabar. It has the god Kos in its name. Let's keep reading. Where are we at? Right here. While the argument might allow the identification of Kos as the deity of the royal line of Bosra, there is no clear evidence that Kos was a state god of Edom or the head of the pantheon. Certainly, Kos is known to have been worshipped in Edom, the Hijaz, and the Negev. But there's also some evidence that other gods were known, such as Hadad, El, Baal, Astarte, and perhaps Sin. Some of them perhaps assimilated with Kos. It is possible that different tribal kin groups in Edom recognize different deities or aspects of deities, as may also have been the case in Ammon. All right, so relations with the imperial powers of Assyria, Babylon, and Persia. The Assyrian king Adad Nirari III claimed that Edom submitted and paid tribute after his campaign to Palestine in 796 BCE, but no specific king of Edom was named. So again, this is more archaeological attestation that Edom existed, just like the Bible said. So more historical clarity within this, within the archaeological findings. Kos Malak, Ayaramu, and Kos Gabar are mentioned as tributary kings of Edom in the inscriptions of Tiglath-Pileser III and his successors. So again, we see these theophoric names giving veneration to the deity Kos and being associated with the Edomites. Edom, along with Moab and Ammon, Assyria. Officials on Assyrian network. Delegations of high officials from Edom brought tribute to Assyrian capital, as it is attested by letters and wine lists from Nimrud, which show that they were looked after. Maybe the king of Edom sometimes led the delegations. One tablet from Nimrud mentions gifts of gold and silver given by the Assyrian king to the king of Ammon and his attendants. The only firm evidence of Mesopotamian presence during the Iron Age in Edom is the relief at Sela near Bosra. This shows a standing king, above him a crescent and a star. And that's the image we have here, right here. And an illegible inscription, meaning it can't be read. Analysis of the style of the relief identifies the figure almost certainly as the Neo-Babylonian king Nabonidus, 555 to 539 BCE. It may have been carved to commemorate Nabonidus' journey through Edom towards Timnah, and may suggest that Edom was under Babylonian administration at the time, although this cannot be proven. There is evidence that at least certain sites of Edom continued to be occupied beyond the traditional end of the Iron II period and through the Persian period. When exactly Edom ceased to exist as an independent kingdom is not clear. It is possible that the localized destruction parts of Bosra was the work of Nabonidus during the campaign of 553 BC. Edom may have been annexed at this point and ceased to exist as an independent state. If this was the case, then the palace can be interpreted as the residence of the king of Edom. But follow selective destruction and some alteration, it may later have become the residency of an official appointed by the Babylonians. It is unlikely that Edom survived the independent kingdom until the Persian period. In the Persian sources, the area of the Euphrates to the southern Palestine, including the Transjordan, is known by the term beyond the river. After 486 BCE, beyond the river became a satrapy in its own right. Therefore, Edom probably came under the overall rule of the Persian satrap of beyond the river. So the satrap will be that foreign official that would come into these lands and start to run them. That's the Persian word for it. You also have in the New Testament, you have the Roman tetrarchs. So the Roman tetrarchs will rule certain areas. Like Judea's Roman tetrarch was Herod. Herod was the Roman tetrarch set up by the Romans to run and delegate Judea at that time. So the Persians had a system too called satrapy, and they would send a satrap to go over there and rule those different lands. It says, at present, there is no evidence that Edom became a separate province within the satrapy, although there is evidence that Ammon was a separate province. Evidence from elsewhere indicates the likelihood that governors were members of an indigenous group rather than external appointees. It is therefore probable that Edom continued to be represented by the super-tribal authority at Bosra under the Babylonians and Persians, possibly into the Hellenistic period under the Ptolemies. Just as Ptolemies maintained the Tobiids status under the Persians and Ammon, with their stronghold at Iraq al-Amir, so too the tribal family of Bosra may have continued as a leading family, perhaps in the role of a client sheikhs of the Persian and Ptolemies. But how far their authority over the tribes of southern Edom remained at the period is conjectural. All right, so that's the end of that chapter dealing with Edom. Again, I just want to throw Edom in there because I felt like that was integral as well, because people speak about Edom, and I never really heard anyone go into the archaeology. Now, there's a paucity and a lack of evidence for the archaeology for several reasons that we covered, but I just felt the need to go ahead and cover that and include that with Northern Kingdom, Southern Kingdom, and bring Edom in as an extra tidbit of information that you guys can glean from. Danny Black said, what book am I reading from? I'll show you. If you look at the top of the page, you can see the actual title of the book, The Oxford Handbook of the Archaeology of the Levant, circa 8332 BCE. And I'll let you see the cover here in a minute. So boom, that's the cover right there. You know what I'm saying? This book probably will run you what was it? 130, 40 bucks, something like that. But it's a good book because it compiles all of this history, all this archaeology into one, handbook. And, if I need to talk about Ammon, I can go to the chapter dealing with Ammon. If I want to talk about the Natufians and the Neolithic Revolution, I can do that. One book, boom, go to the chapter and deal with it. You understand? So if I go to the contents, it has the definition, the archaeology of the Levant. It deals with the Levant as a crossroad between empires, Egypt. I want to cover that in one video, Egypt and the Levant, because that seems to be a hot topic. The archaeological record, then it breaks down each period, the Neolithic, the Chalcolithic, known as the Copper period, the Bronze period, and so on and so forth. Iron, and we dealt with the Iron Age because that's when Israel pops up, and that's what we did with the Iron II period, with the Northern Kingdom, Israel, Southern Kingdom, Judah, and we dealt with Edom today. So that's what was being discussed during tonight's video. I appreciate everybody that came out. He said, "Can you put that book in the chat?" Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I got you. I said, let me stop sharing my screen. We've been on for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I appreciate, man, y'all stayed in here. It's like pretty much the same. It really didn't waver too much. 30 people, fluctuate from 30 to 27 people. Y'all really were, y'all stuck through that, man. That's good. That's good. I'm always worried about giving y'all too much. You know what I'm saying? I like to get that hour and a half range so it's rewatchable. You guys can learn from it, glean from it, take notes or what have you. But yeah, you can get this book on Google Play. I get a lot of my books digitally because it's just easier that way. So you can get this on Google Play Books, the Play Store, and go to the library and you can actually purchase that book. That's the actual book title in the comments. So if anybody wants to check that out, you can. Yeah, you got to rewind. I dealt with the Northern Kingdom first, then I went to Judah. We talked about parallels of archaeology and history, lining up with the biblical narrative and what was stated about the Assyrian incursions and invasions and the deportation. And we see the population boom from these refugees running from the Northern Kingdom, running from the Assyrian invasion and going into the Southern Kingdom where it was a lot safer and more stable during that time. I mean, key points, pertinent and poignant points that, you guys should be aware of. All right. So I'm going to close the show out, man. I'm hoping that you guys glean from this, learn from this, took notes, and you could take something from this dealing with the archaeological visibility of the Levant, Israel and Judah. Look, if anybody's saying in 2021 that these people didn't exist, they obviously don't know what they're talking about. Because we have attestations, we have inscriptions, we have bullae, we have writings, we have all these things. Archaeology showing that the Israelites existed in times past. There's no way around it. We have kings' names, we have material culture. And if you guys sit down and watch this video and examine what was being brought out in this book, you're gonna be hip to that and brought up to speed on that. All right, so we're gonna close out with our brother LV Europa. You know what I'm saying? Show him some love. We're gonna close out with him, man. I think we're gonna close out with Visa. That's a hot song, man. This brother did his thing with that song Visa. You know what I'm saying? Subscribe to LV Europa TV on YouTube, man. And stay tuned. Tomorrow we will be doing chapter 4 to the Prophet's book, The Black Jews in Africa and America. I will be dropping that tomorrow and reading that to you guys live. All right? So I appreciate the love. Hit that like button. Remember, source gang over everything. We go directly to the source over here. We're not rhetoric. The mother cats is rhetoric warriors and keyboard generals. But we actually deal with real empirical information at the source. You know how we get down, man. Genesis 49ers. If y'all been following me for a while, y'all already know my get down. Y'all know my stilo. You know what I'm saying? All right, well, no, let's get to it, man. Let's get the LV Europa, man. I appreciate y'all love, man. I'm going to continue to feed y'all information. Show support. Hit the like button. Share the video on all social media platforms so we can get this out and we can grow. We can reach more people and can do more things. All right? Appreciate y'all, man. Love y'all. Let's go.
Yeah. Over Europa. I got a visa, that's one swipe. They change it to me, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a beeper, cold as a freezer. Heat up in my leisure, I feel like a fever, baby. You know I'm a keeper, I got a visa, that's one swipe. They change it to me, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a beeper, cold as a freezer. Heat up in my leisure, I feel like a fever, baby. You should know that I'm a keeper. Jesus keeps saying, hey, you can keep that tucked away. Some gon' come with the lies. Remember them when you pray. Some gon' cry when they die. You don't worry about decay. Look, I done went through away my time is short, so I'm living today. That shit was real. I had to tell them slaves. But you gotta be brave. It's a land of the free. Gotta move like waves. Hey, put the ring to the pad. I give them path for the rage. Then I put them on the path to take them all up stage. I got a visa, that's one swipe. They change it to me, I got that old money, baby. That bitch came with a beeper, cold as a freezer. Heat up in my leisure, I feel like a fever, baby. You know I'm a keeper, I got a visa, that's one swipe. This change the demeanor, I got that almighty baby. That bitch came with a beat, what cold as a freezer. I heat up in my leisure, I feel like a fever, baby. You should know that I'm a keeper. This is a keepsake, ayy. You can use this right away. Some gon' come with the truth. Honor them when you pray. Some gon' laugh about their life. They don't worry about the lays. Look, I'm gonna whip up away that leather's real, but you can use it today. Don't worry about how you're gonna get paid. Lord, give it free, take it away, ayy. Don't you wanna be free? Remove that rage. It's a path to the light, don't misuse those ways. We flow with the truth. Gotta move like waves. I got a visa, that's one swipe. This change the demeanor, I got that almighty baby. That bitch came with a beat, but cold as a freezer. I heat up in my leisure, I feel like a fever, baby. You know I'm a keeper, I got a visa, that's one swipe. This change the demeanor, I got that almighty baby. That bitch came with a beat, but cold as a freezer. I heat up in my leisure, I feel like a fever, baby. You should know that I'm a keeper.
Yep. Shout out to LV Europa, man. Shout out to the Source Gang. Gold Coast Gorillas, to the Law and Testimony. Shout out to Pro Rizzo. Shout out to James, the Argument King, swinging and banging all the way from Atlantic Canyon. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to D Red, the Blue Collar Scholar. Shout out to the CEO. You know what I'm saying? My brother down in Houston right now shooting his video. Shout out to him. Jeremiah, please say to Yah. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to him. Shout out to Jihad, man. Shout out to my brother Jihad. You know what I'm saying? The Johnny Cochran of the Holy Prophets. You know what I'm saying? Show some respect on that brother name. Shout out to the Tanks on the Ground. Shout out to Tanks on the Ground. General Yashar. Shout out to Elder Yara. You know what I'm saying? Putting in that pain and that work. Shout out to Anonymous Hebrew. You know what I'm saying? Same thing, man. Brother's been war, you know what I'm saying, holding the line and holding it down for the nation of Israel, man. Shout out to Israelite intelligentsia. Shout out to Orthodox Moore. We appreciate you, brother, all the work that you do, all the edifying videos that you release and the work that you put into it and the hours you put into this, man. Start supporting the people that's putting in the work, man, not the clowns that's into sensationalism. Support education, support edification. You know what I'm saying? Support intelligentsia, not ignorance. Source Gang, 7 Gang, over everything. We out.